Welcome to the Board of Commissioners meeting for February 4th, 2020. I was going to say a couple things about the meeting today. We don't have an executive session today, and we have 2 time certains, one at 10 and one at 11. If we have a little space between the consent calendar and the first time certain at 10 a.m., we can perhaps move to some announcements and then move back into the regular agenda. Are there any other adjustments to the agenda? I think you had one item to pull.
Yes, I asked to pull the item on the property transfer.
5B2. B2. So we'll pull that and we'll talk about that separately after the regular consent calendar. Any other adjustments to the agenda? Nope. Any emergency business today? No. Okay, we'll move on to public comments. First up is Bob Spencer. Feel free to come to the podium, state your name and the district that you're in, and Commissioner Bernie here will give you 3 minutes, and you'll have the lights right there next to you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Bob Spencer. I'm president of McKenzie Watershed Protective. I live in Vida. And I'm here this morning to express support for the code amendments and changes that Keir has proposed. I think you're going to see that in this afternoon's meeting, but I'm not sure that there was going to be public input on that today, so I thought I'd get in here this morning and let you know that we definitely support the changes that he's proposing. I don't think it's complete. There's still other things that we would like to see added to that, and we encourage you to have some public meetings and get input from the public as to some additions that can be made to that. But thank you for addressing this issue, particularly on the McKenzie, because the importance of that water supply, the riparian issues. 50 miles of the riparian zone out of 80 miles is gone, and we need to do something to address that. And the water quality issues have been documented. The McKenzie's in serious trouble, and the public is just starting to find out about it. And part of our mission is to inform the public of what's going on, secure partnership in solving this problem, because it's a serious issue for water, fish, and forests. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next up is Mr. Piccioni.
I don't have a lot to say because I'm Dave Piccioni. I don't really have anything prepared because I just didn't know what the topic was going to be. But asking you guys, I heard somebody's interested in talking about childcare. So what I know about it, not just child care, but care of the elderly, care of the sick, disabled, addicted, things like that. Their help, people like that receive quite a bit of help from Northern European countries like that are considered socialist or whatever. But the people are pretty happy with it, I think. I'm not sure everybody is, but a lot are. So what would be good for yeah. So another thing that I wanted to mention, that's how they do things there, kind of like what they call socialism, democratic socialism. In capitalism, we see that things like wars, things like disasters, natural disasters, man-made disasters, anything like that can make people very rich. And it can actually help the economy, but you see that it's not a good thing. It's helping the economy, but it's on the back of a lot of people and people and animals or whatever that are suffering a lot. At 9/11, some people, even Americans, made a lot of money with high stakes betting, and I mean, who could have predicted that? So some people had to know. I'm kind of like talking about other stuff too. So anyway, have a good day, and Keep on trucking, keep on working. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Betsy Hintz? Great.
Good morning, County Commissioners. My name is Betsy Hitz. I live in Eugene. I am representing 350 Eugene. My cohorts will be in attendance in this afternoon's session, but right now they're in Salem advocating for statewide climate action. We would like to thank the commissioners for planning to hire a climate action plan project manager in the next few months for a rapid timeline, beginning with a community phase in spring of 2020 and updates in March and April, and for reviewing the City of Eugene's equity panel recommendations, and as a result, adding a resiliency plan phase. And we thank Commissioner Burney in particular for his added recommendations in support of green jobs and energy industry, for public communication to monitor progress, and for establishing a climate advisory committee. We agree with the staff recommendation to adopt option 1 of the resolution for establishing a climate change strategy. We point out, however, that the resolution would be strengthened with the inclusion of carbon reduction targets, similar to those of the Eugene Climate Recovery Ordinance. There is no indication of including a Lane County Climate Recovery Ordinance, and we think it should be added in. We ask for clarification as to whether the greenhouse gas inventory will include countywide emissions as opposed to internal county operations emissions. We think clarifying language should be included. We encourage the County Commission to push for bold and aggressive climate action goals. We encourage making those goals binding. In so doing, the County Climate Action Plan would not be simply aspirational. Thank you.
Any other comments? Not too many people in today. Okay, we'll move on to Commissioner response and/or remonstrance. Anybody have any comments? Commissioner Sorensen?
A couple things. Well, first of all, thanks so much for coming in and talking with us about the suggestions you have for improving the climate action plan and moving forward. And especially thank you for, number one, acknowledging Commissioner Burney's leadership on this. Number two, thanks for your suggestion that we go beyond the internal operations of Lane County government. Number three, thanks for your suggestion on an ordinance that has a little bit more authority than a board order, adopting a plan or starting a plan. And thanks for continuing to monitor this and give us feedback and good ideas. Oh, and later, maybe we'll have time for me to talk a little bit about United Front.
Yes, I think we'll have time for announcements and commissioner business after comments. Anybody else? Commissioner Fox?
Thank you, Chair Buck. Two things. One, just things that happened this week that I'm going to mention right now. On January 31st, we dedicated Jeffrey Commons. It was out on the corner of Roosevelt and 99. It's a sponsors project. Mr. Mokrajewski and I were there, along with Dan Bryant and a host of other people. It's a pretty spectacular tiny home duplex facility that is right in the heart of the Bethel neighborhood, welcomed by the neighbors. And it's Sponsors is the operator, and we all know the amazing things that Sponsors does. There is nothing like it anyplace in the United States, and they're really are leading the way as far as providing different opportunities for men and women who are recently released from jail. Ms. Murkowski, I think you'll agree with me that that's one of the nicest looking neighborhood developments that we've seen in a long, long, long time. I'd like to invite everybody to visit it. And thank you, Paul Solomon and staff, for making that happen. The second, and I'll talk about this more later, is yesterday the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission had a full-day retreat, which was fun and interesting. And a lot of the concerns and the issues that we work with on the long-term planning for the MWMC is how do we keep the rivers clean? It's a matter of making certain that the water we put back into the rivers is clean water. Years ago, one of the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission commissioners ran the treatment plant. Peter Ruffier ran the treatment plant on River Avenue. And I asked him, is it okay to swim downstream of where the discharge pipe goes in? And he said, well, I wouldn't. But it is okay, but I wouldn't. I recently asked him the same question again. He said, it's fine. So that's the kind of improvements that we're making. They're continually, what we pushed for yesterday is continually looking for the best practices in terms of treating wastewater and making certain that it is at the right temperature and the right composition to go back in the rivers. And it's amazing what is happening. One of the recommendations that came out is that a technology navigator, I don't know where they got that term, Mr. Murkowski, a navigator be employed to continually look on the horizon to see what the next emerging technology for wastewater treatment is, so that we're continually staying ahead of the curve. And we're also talking about renewable energy, converting the methane that is produced naturally by the plant into natural gas that is renewable and will be returned, will be put in the natural gas system. So all of that's happening right now. Your Wastewater Management Commission is more than just handling what flushes down the toilet. It's making certain that that we do have a responsible outlook on what goes back into the rivers. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Bernie?
Thank you for all those that provided input, and that was appreciated. I just wanted to share regarding the items on the agenda later this afternoon. I'll hold my remarks until we're at that topic, or those topics. I did want to mention, in terms of other issues, that Friday evening, my wife and I attended the Junior League's Abolish Town Hall, which was really surfacing a conversation in our communities about sex and human trafficking. It was an uncomfortable conversation. It was also uncomfortable to hear to which many children are, in fact, groomed in our communities for that. So my hat's off to the Junior League of Eugene. There were several hundred people there. And I would also like to mention that District Attorney Perlow was there, and she was very articulate in identifying exactly what this Board of Commissioners is doing to help mitigate that and provide service, as well as what her office is doing. And I simply wanted to acknowledge that this morning.
Very good. Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. So I'm wearing some of my Timber Unity gear today because I'm going to be going up to Salem on Thursday for the rally. And in fact, if I still have some space in my car, if anyone wants to contact me, I'll be leaving from Ray's parking lot in Veneta at 5 a.m. And I plan to spend my day there advocating for my rural district, because the cap and spend and tax bill will have a disproportionate impact on rural communities. And it's something so complex that shouldn't be dealt with in a short session and really should be put to the voters. So that's how I'm planning to spend my day on Thursday. And I'm hoping that this board will also think carefully about being distracted and getting into matters not of county concern as we delve into things that we can have little impact on as far as change goes, yet will have large impacts on our constituents, particularly in rural areas. So we'll hope that we'll move forward and push for transparency in all this and push for allowing the voters to have their say.
Thank you. I just also wanted to thank the three folks that spoke. Mr. Spencer spoke about the Mackenzie River and being able to update some codes regarding the care of the river, and I really appreciate that since it's part of my district. And I look forward to working with him on those items, continual work on those items. Thank you, Mr. Piccioni, for bringing up childcare issues. That's something that's particularly important to me, and the other items were important as well. And I look forward to talking more about the climate item later this afternoon, when the rest of your folks will show up too. Over the course of the last week, last meeting I was really sick, so I apologize for coughing so much. And, but I was able on Friday, this last Friday, actually, I'm going to back up just a little bit more. The Eugene Chambers event on that Tuesday night was very good. I didn't have to speak too much, so it was good in that regard. But they had some really wonderful presenters and awards. Sid Voorhees got Citizen of the Year, and there were some really deserving kids who got some scholarships as well. So I want to thank the Chamber for doing good work. And the Friday the 24th, before our last meeting, we did host the governor here in Harris Hall with City Club. And I was able to ask the first question, which was about housing and land use and how connected they were. I really appreciate her coming to Lane County and being willing to share her time here in Harris Hall. I was also able to go to Cottage Grove to also celebrate the groundbreaking of some homes, which was very similar to what they had done the day before out in Florence with Commissioner Bozovich, in which they are doing home ownership on land trust parcels. So it's affordable, low-income home ownership options. What makes it unique is it's on those land trust parcels, and I look forward to seeing many more of those in our community. I think that's all for myself. Any other remonstrances, comments? Yes?
If I may, Chair Buck, the Future for a Citizen award was made, and each high school puts forward a choice for Future for a Citizen. And I've had the pleasure and honor of serving on that committee that chooses a Future for a Citizen for the last number of years. And, it's amazing. In '72, I graduated from high school. Today, the kids are doing things that are so advanced in terms of social services and public service and advancement of education. It's, they're getting, many of the kids are coming out with, they're coming out of high school as sophomores in college. And it's just remarkable that each one of the kids that was there was deserving. And that Willamette High School, that Willamette High School student was the one who received the award this year. But it was a really tough, I wish we could award 7 awards every year. It's pretty amazing what these kids do.
Yeah,
Thank you for being there.
Fantastic. All right, we will move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar with the exception of item 5B2?
I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Motion moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Burney. Any discussion? All right, all those in approval say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. So we will move to the item that was pulled, item 5B2, Order 20-02-04-02, in the matter of authorizing the sale of county-owned real property for $499 to the Oregon Riparian Project. And we have Mr. Turk here for any questions of the board. Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. So one of the reasons I pulled this item was it was a transfer of property. And as we are searching for any properties at all that we can possibly land bank for affordable housing, I wanted to take a moment to ask about the developability of this parcel and whether or not it could be used for residential development, and whether this was considered before we offered it up for sale.
No, it cannot. It was designated in the original plat as open space for the subdivision. So since it has that designation, it has to be used as open space. Also, it's a drainage area. The whole property is basically a creek. If I may approach?
Of course, please.
Well, I was just going to show them.
Yeah, if you want to, I've looked at Google Maps, so I'm,
It's all
Coming on the mic, Jeff.
yeah. And
So the property is all a drainage creek and area, and again, it's designated in the plat of the subdivision that it has to be used as open space.
I hate taking up staff time to do this, but I'm making a point that there should not be any property that we're not looking at right now. If we're willing to trade off fairground property, and what's interesting, as I attended a meeting yesterday about a park development in Santa Clara, stakeholders meeting, and the park director for the City of Eugene mentioned that they had identified surplus park property for that inventory of land banking. So I'm kind of curious. We'll have a discussion about that later this afternoon. But just be prepared with every surplus property, tax foreclosed or whatever. I'm going to ask the question, could it be developed for residential and could it be put in the land bank for affordable housing from this point forward?
Please.
Just, and I won't take up much time, but typically, we get deeded properties once a year through the foreclosure process, typically in September. And one of the things I do is just that. I look at the properties, and then we'll either make a presentation to the Housing Policy Board and other nonprofits to identify any properties that may be of interest for affordable housing purposes. And there is a process outlined in Lane Manual for effecting transfers for affordable housing purposes. So I appreciate it, and I will make sure that that happens.
So with that, I'll move approval of Order 20020402.
Second?
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, second by Commissioner Berney. Discussion, I think Commissioner Berney and then Commissioner Farr. Thank you.
I appreciate the principle and point behind, and agree with Commissioner Bozevich's statement. I also believe there's a process in place where you do that, but this is obviously amping up the priority of that, and I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I'm glad that Commissioner Bozievich pulled this and talked about land banking and what I consider highest and best use of Lane County property. At all times, Ms. Morkowski, from the time we've met, I've talked about the highest and best use. My personal highest and best use doesn't always match the final decision on what actually is the highest and best use. But every time we have an opportunity to create housing on what is surplus land or relatively unused land or little used land, then we need to consider that. And not just Lane County government. Schools need to look at it. EWEB needs to look at it. The City of Eugene needs to look at it, as they have on a regular basis. And Springfield is getting very aggressive at looking at vacant land, particularly publicly owned land, for potential use to help alleviate the housing crisis that we're suffering from. So thank you, Commissioner Bozievich, for bringing that up. Every time we get a chance to talk about it, we should. And every time I will have a chance to talk about highest and best use of property, I will. And I don't always prevail in what is my highest and best use, but the discussion is always welcome. And thank you for being here again, Mr. Turk. And thanks again for your work on Camp 99, on moving it to the toward the beneficial use that it's in right now. Thank you.
Commissioner Berney.
I was just going to reiterate what both commissioners said. As a result of this experience, which is not over yet, the city of Springfield has already aggressively initiated a process. In fact, according to one of the city council persons I've been speaking with, they wanted to propose an alternative site for this particular development, but learned that they could not. Learned that it either wouldn't meet the time frame given the nature of the site, and also at the last minute learning an offer had already come in on it, so it was tied up in escrow. But nonetheless, I think that this is brought to the fore, something that Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Buck have always been bringing to the fore. And I am really pleased about it, and I'm pleased that we will find that Springfield will offer up numerous sites for this type of activity in the next round of funding. But I just need to make the point. Sorry, Jeff. I don't want to waste your time. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Turk has been doing a good job with this assignment for a long time. One thing that I would like to say is that during my time on the board, the state law's been changed to allow counties to retain land that they've tax foreclosed. I shouldn't say that's been something, that's been a long-standing thing. But what has changed is that if we designate that land as a county park, whether it really is a park-like spot or not, it could be a gas station, it could be a parking lot. But if the county designates it as a county park and then sells it, all of the revenue from the sale goes to the county park. So one thing I've been quite interested in is, as a method of providing additional funding for Lane County parks, is to retain all 100% of the value of the property when it's sold. Now, when, as I understand it, and Jeff, you can correct me on this, when the property is sold by the county, not as a park, but as part of your normal job of selling excess property, then only about 9% of the value of the property goes to the county government. And when the county receives the full 100%, the other 91% goes to the other taxing districts, like the schools, cities, et cetera. It also, as I understand it, we get to keep the administrative cost, i.e. to pay the cost of buying or disposing of property, i.e. your function. We get to keep that money ahead of the distribution of the 91% to the other jurisdictions. And oftentimes these properties aren't worth a lot, and so that could be a high percentage of the total. So I get that, and I get the need for it. I also think that because of the magnitude of the housing problem, that retaining these properties, if they are suitable for housing, is a good idea. And I guess we will call that housing land banking. But the vast majority, and maybe this is a question, what percentage of the properties that you handle are suitable for building housing on?
That's difficult to say, because every year, to be honest, you just don't know what you're going to get through the tax foreclosure process. But yes, typically, every year we may get only, let's say 2, 3, 4 properties with improvements on them as far as houses. And then, again, yeah, you may get some just vacant lots that might be suitable, and you'll get them all over the county. It won't just be within city boundaries of Eugene, Springfield, Florence, whichever city. It will be, all over the county. So, yes, there's always some, and typically the process, and there's processes lined out in Lane Manual as well, always after we get the property, after the properties are deeded through the foreclosure process, I always have discussions with the Parks Department. And again, there's a process outlined in Lane Manual as how to go through that process, along with letting the Housing Policy Board know, because their members are the ones that typically do affordable housing, as here's properties that may be available.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Any other discussion? All right, we've got a motion on the floor for approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Turk. We do not have any county council announcements today, so we'll move on to county administration announcements.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things I thought I would share. Yesterday, we had a meeting late in the day with the 15th Night group. As the board knows, we put space at our Serbu campus out to bid for use by a local community group as a youth shelter for homeless youth. That was responded to and awarded to Lane Education Service District, along with Looking Glass, in partnership with the 15th Night Collaborative. And so yesterday we had the opportunity, it was the first time that the project team met with county officials to talk about, there's been some discussion about which pod 1 or pod 3. So we were able to sit and have that discussion. I thought it was really great that the project team brought a youth voice to the table, and we were able to hear the concerns and issues faced by homeless youth. And so it was really, I think, helpful for everyone in the room to understand the people that we're going to serve at this location and how we can best serve those individuals. So good conversation there. We're evaluating, and I think moving in the direction of trying to identify the use of the pod that is desired by everyone, both best suited for the youth services and detention staff who are concerned about separation and safety issues, as well as by the project team that are concerned about making sure that homeless youth feel welcomed and safe and secure themselves. So we're moving forward with that, identifying cost estimates for improvements that need to be made to that pod, and looking forward to making those improvements and advancing that really important project for our community over the next several months. I want to also share with the board that tomorrow evening we have 2 meetings. First, it'll be the kickoff. I think Chair Buck, are you going to be there at the Park Funding Task Force?
I am planning on being there.
Planning, okay. I know childcare is always, I'm planning on bringing my 2 daughters to the meeting. They're really excited to talk about funding for our park system. So your daughter, of course, is welcome, but we will have the kickoff for our Park Funding Task Force. This was recommended as part of the proposed budget for this year, and the board supported that and included that in your adopted budget. And so we've formed this group, sort of modeling after the successful model we had with the Lane Events, the Large Events Task Force, and the Park Master Plan Task Force, representative of communities throughout Lane County, and helping to identify different creative funding sources to help enhance, maintain and enhance our park system. So that'll be tomorrow at 5:30 in the Goodson Room at the Delta campus. And then also at 5:30 tomorrow, the first Wednesday of every month, is our Equity and Access Advisory Board meeting. That'll take place at the Charlton Building in room 258. And of course, commissioners are always welcome to attend if you're able to that public meeting of our Equity and Access Advisory Board. We also have the Blacks in Government dinner this Friday, and I think we have a couple of tables that Lane County is sponsoring at that dinner Friday night at 5:30, and that's at the social hours at 5:30, and then the program and dinner at 7 at the Graduate Hotel. And so if there are commissioners who have not already committed to going and you'd like to, please let us know. So a number of events happening there. That's all I have, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Ever so briefly on the repurposing of the Serbu pod. That's a very deliberative process, Mr. Mokrajewski, that you're guiding through, and you're balancing the interests of nonprofits and also what is sometimes onerous requirements by code that for those of us who have worked in, for instance, residential development, you say, well, why do we have to do that? Why can't we just do this? And there are reasons, you know, the fire code and the safety of the that's laid out. Wherever we can, we need to look at what of the codes are arbitrary. And while we can do nothing about it as we move forward with the design of the building, we can certainly begin to lobby sometimes it has to go clear to the federal level in order to change some of the codes that exist requiring the development of well, this is housing, this is a residential development that we're working on. And, you know, sometimes it's onerous, and always it's very expensive to knock out a wall or to reconfigure a fence. You know, it's not like popping to Jerry's and building a fence around your backyard. That's not what we're doing here. And the repurposing of the pod, whichever pod we move forward with, and we seem to be leaning toward the easternmost pod at this point in time, which is more isolated. Whichever one we do reconfigure and repurpose, it's going to be there for a long time. And it'll be used to service youth for many, many years to come, as many as 32 kids at a time in the development that we're looking at. So good work, bringing all of these multiple threads together, Mr. Mokrajewski, and sometime very, very soon we'll see kids being helped in a way that we've never been able to do it in Lane County before. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. I ditto what Commissioner Farr said. I look very, oh, yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
So one real quick question on that. Is there any operational funding available for this use of the pod?
What we have said from the start is that Lane County's goal is to make the facility usable as a shelter. And what that means, you know, Commissioner Farr hit on a number of the issues that we've been struggling with. The juvenile detention center was built as a detention center. And so now what we're trying to do is retrofit a purposely built detention center into an open and accessible residential facility for homeless youth, totally different uses. And so we're going from a, what's considered an institutional building use, to a residential building use. So there's all this retrofitting that has to happen. What Lane County is committed to is making the space accessible and available. And so there are a number, I mean, it's going to be a significant investment on behalf of the county to make the improvements that need to be made to allow for that use. But the operation itself will be funded by the nonprofit partners that have come together and largely supported by Grace Serbu. And the 15th Night collaborative effort. So you know, that's a long way to say it has not been our intent, and we're not aware of any operating funding for us to operate it. It's always been our understanding this was going to be a partnership. We would leverage our existing facility and make the improvements necessary for it to be used in this purpose, but the nonprofit and private sector would come forward and fund the operations.
It's unfortunate we don't have operational funding available because I know that our largest provider of services to homeless and at-risk youth, Looking Glass, has had difficulty fundraising in competition with 15th Night lately, and it seems like this is just going to add more pressure to that, where, you know, to the point where they came to HSC looking for funding to try and hang on to staff that they're losing in this tight labor economy. So I just, you know, something to put in the back of board members' minds is, you know, we've provided operational funding for things like our winter strategies, but we're not providing operational funding in this case.
I want to just share, Commissioner, a clarification that Looking Glass is actually going to be the agency providing the service, so they will.
I understand that, but I do understand they are struggling with how they are going to fund it, extremely, and whether or not it's going to pull away from some of their other programs. There's not enough funding out there right now. And this establishment of this new organization, 15th Night, has actually split the pie in some ways, and they're really struggling with operational funding.
Commissioner Berney?
You triggered my own thinking on this one. Kudos on what you've been able to do, and I cannot tell you how well received by that Abolish movement, dealing with homeless, predominantly young women, but young men too, when they learn that the county is moving in this direction. I do think that I'm going to tag on here. Part of what I see as the difficult garnering resources from nonprofits is also related to President Trump's tax cut, which has really generated less of a need to shelter or to donate from many of those that have. And so we get into this dilemma, as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned. So as it relates to this, I hope we don't, it doesn't sound like funding for operations is a certainty, and it doesn't sound, at this point in time, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, and it does not sound like the county's decision to move forward required a knowledge of what the operational funding, where it would come from and what it would be. I just think we do have to factor that in as we move forward on these initiatives that are so desperately needed. I was one of those forever ago that pitched the original Surbu Youth Center, the youth detention facility, and there wasn't operational funds attached to that. And so it was a campaign, the public supported it, and yet many, many beds remained empty for quite a while because the operational funding wasn't there. So I think it's legit to bring that up. That's my only point.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. You know, yesterday I was in there, and some of the toilets in the salmon pod, I haven't even had the plastic taken off of them. So, you know, that's how disused the facility has been. But as we move forward with the project, one thing that has been considered and one thing that I'm pushing for is residential small housing units to help the nonprofits with their staff who work there, potentially providing residential as a part of their income, which is an attractive means to supplement what is really very low hourly wages that are paid by nonprofits throughout not just Lane County, every place. Nonprofits have paid low wages. But the discussion regarding residential pods is a long discussion. It's not going to happen overnight, but it can happen. There's room there, and I'm pretty excited about the possibility of helping both Looking Glass and Whitebird in providing the services that are going to be provided inside that pod. So it's pretty exciting, Mr. Mokrahajski, and I know, well, my heart beats loud. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozovich.
I just quickly want to ask, and you can provide this at a different time, Commissioner Berney, but I'd like to find evidence that charitable giving has dropped since the Trump tax cuts.
It has from me.
You know,
That's my evidence.
that's not, you know, that's circumstantial evidence, but I don't believe that's an accurate statement, and you're drawing a cause and effect without providing evidence for it.
I'll follow up.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah, I was just going to say the opinion that I have, and I think it is an informed opinion, is that the amount of charitable contributions has either gone up or has not been affected in total by the tax cut that the President and Congress enacted. But I think it is fair to say that the number of contributions that are made by middle-income people to charitable organizations has dropped. The number of contributions has dropped. And so the impact on nonprofits in our community that don't have a lot of large donors, it does affect their ability to operate. So I think that that's what's been going on in the charitable giving world. Foundation giving has gone up because it's tied to the growth in the stock market. But that's not a factor that the middle-class people have in their charitable giving. So it has gone down.
Commissioner Berney.
Well, I'm amazed again at how many people are watching these proceedings. I just learned that I was just told that the United Way of Lane County, not that it's a direct cause and effect, but I was just shared that the United Way of Lane County has received several $100,000 less this year than last year. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is direct cause and effect. I will follow up with that, but I wanted to share that information.
It would be quite interesting to know from our local nonprofits how that Trump tax cut has changed, if any, charitable contributions. And I know we have somebody coming up at 10 a.m. that can tell us that as well for another organization. Any other discussion on announcements? Commissioner
I'd like to take a few minutes. before the 10 a.m., just to talk a little bit about the United Front, both as a report on this year's United Front, but also to help the board officers in the future United Fronts. First of all, the United Front is a group of governments that get together. This year's group of governments included the City of Eugene, City of Springfield, Lane County, Lane Transit District, Willamette Lane Parks and Recreation District, and the Springfield School District. The firm in Washington, D.C., government relations firm that we together have hired to help us with this is Smith, Dawson, and Andrews, also known as SDA. Smith, Dawson, and Andrews is a company that dispatched at least 6 of their partners or employees to help us with the various visits. The dominant amount of work was done on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, the 28th, 29th, and 27th, 28th, and 29th. So Mayor Vinnis, Mayor Lundberg, myself, and there's somewhat of a tradition, I think, of having the outgoing chair to be part of this. A number of staff people, of course, Alex Kyler from Lane County was there the whole time. So first thing we did was have a massive briefing on all of the United Front issues, and we try to support each other's issues. So, for example, one of our major issues, which I gave a briefing on for Senator Wyden, Senator Merkley, and Congressman DeFazio, was our issue with the federal government not giving us a backup on the federally supported health centers Assistance Act and our need for a indemnity, defense and indemnity for claims that are brought against us by third parties. That's kind of a mouthful, but Alex and I were able to have a number of interactions with the senators or their staff and Representative DeFazio and his staff. Another big thing going on that the county pursued was the federal transportation legislation that was being announced while we were there. And we all know that Congressman DeFazio is chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So their proposal, the committee's proposal, and the proposal of related agencies to infrastructure was announced while we were there, and Congressman DeFazio gave us a little briefing on it and his transportation staff. And there are a number of projects that may be part of that affect Lane County specifically. They're not using the word markup anymore. They're using words like special project or other euphemisms. We had a lot of backup from the other partners, and we provided backup to them on things like homelessness grants to the Springfield schools. Of course, the BUILD project that is connecting Eugene to Springfield with the corridor, after school proposal, the Forest Legacy program that Willamette Lane is involved with, funding for mass transit, just a lot, and I think it was very worthwhile. Mr. James, the chair of the board of Willamette Lane Park and Recreation Area, and me, among others, made a suggestion, perhaps for next year. And number one is that we get together earlier. So I might suggest that the chair be involved, and I'm certainly willing to put some time in on this because I believe that this project of the unified governments, United Front governments, is a really good one. He and I discussed bringing in other partners that we have not had before, including Lane Community College and the Eugene School District and possibly the Bethel School District, so that there's more of a youth focus with Willamette, Lane County, and the cities and the school districts. So more on youth and getting more buy-in. Because every time we met with an agency, such as EPA over the Brownfield project the city of Springfield's working on, every time we met with these people, and I know that Commissioner Bozovich and Commissioner Farr have been involved in the United Front, so I'll just say that whenever we were in a meeting like that, the agency said, this brings a lot more likelihood that you're going to get this grant because of the support of related governments. So I see our public safety folks out there. That is also true. We've gotten a COPS grant. In fact, we met with DOJ for the purpose of lining up yet another grant, and learned quite a bit. We also met with the, Alex and I met with the National Association of County Staff regarding setting up the meeting that Commissioner Bozovich will be presenting, our tort liability or indemnity problem. And they gave us a lot of good suggestions, and Alex is working on those to improve our resolution so that when Jay presents it, we can work out as many of the bugs as possible, and there can be a nice warm handoff to making sure that the proposal that the Oregon delegation makes through Lane County's work that it has a better chance of passing at both February or March, and also at the summer meeting of NACO. And that is influential on members of Congress, particularly those who have been county commissioners, such as Congressman DeFazio or Congressman Blumenauer or other members across the country. So overall, I thought it was well worth it, and I thought the way it was laid out was very good. The one, I guess I have two improvements. I won't say critiques, because there's a lot of work that goes into all this. But the first would be that we, particularly because our board chair hasn't been on it before, that we get a briefing for the board or for the chair. We get a briefing much earlier, maybe June, so that when we get ready to prepare the book of United Front federal priorities, that there's a more buy-in, that there's more knowledge. And the other thing is that we get together the federal partners, the local partners, and try to see if we can get some more local partners. We've had in the past the University of Oregon. I don't really favor including them because their needs are and their dollar amounts are dwarfing ours. But I think that we've had the city of Cottage Grove in the past. We've had Lane Community College in the past. We've had other, I believe the Eugene School District was part of it at one point. So Springfield's definitely part of it, and they're seeing the benefits. They really are. So they're definitely wanting to come back again. So I just think that we need to have maybe a more attention to it rather than it just being a trip and the board chairs, thrust into the role, which I was happy to do, and it is a huge amount. Also, another thing for planning for next year, besides maybe trying to get more partners and try to get some scheduling ahead of time, would be that the board meeting itself. We had to get me in on the later end of the board meeting. Might as well plan right now, or whoever is going to be there next year, probably Commissioner Buck. Already planning in that Tuesday evening will be an extra long day because you'll have to take in perhaps some of the board meeting. I know Jay was on the phone from the Rayburn cafeteria or outside the cafeteria, Rayburn Building. So it's hard to put together a meeting like that, phone meeting, unless you really plan for it. So anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions or engage in any discussion about the not only the most recently concluded United Front, but also the planning for the next one.
Any comments? Commissioner Brozovich?
Will note that in the past, we've brought this forward through the legislative committee and actually had a board item where we went over the United Front priorities and actually adopted them as a board in a very public manner.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important piece of transparency. Seeing that it seems like sending commissioners back to DC is becoming controversial for some reason. It'd be good to keep this as transparent as possible. Maybe look back at some of the past years and how we've brought that forward over time. Can't start too soon because you have to kind of develop that United Front book together with your partners. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes between Alex and his counterparts at the various other United Front partners like City of Springfield, City of Eugene, to develop that book. But it kind of is, in the past years, that's sort of the way it's come to us. This year, it kind of didn't quite get to that fruition, but we actually have had legislative committee review, and then it comes to the board as basically just like our legislative priorities somewhat to adopt the United Front priorities.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that maybe some point in this meeting, maybe a future agenda item would be to get a fixed date down the road whereby the legislative committee and the board would be considering United Front priorities, and then we would actually have a way to adopt them. Now, traditionally in August, the Smith-Dawson and Andrews people will come out here and they'll meet with the board chair, and that will help us. I don't know that there were really that many changes from that briefing till now, but I know that's a very rushed kind of trip, and I think we need to really make sure that we have the board buy-in. There was nothing in the United Front booklet that I think any of us would oppose, but it would be nice to know what it is that, because our logo is prominently on the United Front booklet, and the legislators, particularly the senators and Congressman Fazio, will be more likely to support these things when they see that we're all in this together.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you very much for the update. We have just 2 or 3 minutes before our next time certain, but it looks like almost everybody's here. So why don't you make your way to the desk, and we'll start here shortly. Okay. So we are on item 7B of our agenda today, which is Order 20-02-04-03, in the matter of approving the January 2020 Lane County Community Public Safety Repair Plan update developed and recommended by the Public Safety Coordinating Council. And we have 3 folks here with us. Sheriff Harold and Paul Solomon from sponsors, and Susan Sowers, our systems analyst from LCOG. Feel free to start anytime.
Great. Commissioner Buck, commissioners, thank you for having us this morning. We are going to go over the 10-year public safety plan, also known as the Community Public Safety Repair Plan. This plan was first developed back in 2013 under the guidance of then District Attorney Alex Gardner. In the intervening years, we've built on the original plan and included a number of non-governmental agencies that are really critical components of our public safety system. And this year in particular, we added an agency that hadn't been in the plan before, the Public Defender Services of Lane County, recognizing that their voice had been missing. Susan Sowards and I will walk you through most of the iteration of the plan. Serendipitously, the sheriff is here this morning, so he will assist as well and walk through the Lane County Sheriff's Office portion. I think it's important to recognize that this plan represents a diverse array of public safety services, yet functions with a single voice. Additionally, we recognize the hydraulics of the system that are really interdependent on one another. If you lose funding for one piece, it impacts other parts of the system. Thanks in part to strategic local funding initiatives, new state funding, and creative partnerships, all agencies have moved into Phase 2, with the exception of the Police Services Division of the Sheriff's Office, where we still lack basic, adequate rural patrol throughout Lane County. In recent years, since the first iteration of the document, we have made huge progress moving a system that was on the brink of collapse to a functional yet under-resourced system that is doing a much better job of addressing system demands and community safety needs of all Lane County residents. In addition to forecasting gaps and needs, the plan also gives us an opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate the huge successes that we have made since 2014. The work plan work group of the PSCC, which Commissioner Bozovich is a member of, will continue to revise, update, and report to the PSCC and the board on progress made on an annual basis. It's also important to acknowledge the historic funding challenges that allowed our system to nearly collapse. The loss of logging revenue and federal timber subsidies, coupled with property tax limitations from ballot measures 5, 47, and 50, have made it impossible to make up the lost tax revenue. If we had the same tax rate as Marion County, we would receive more than $58 million in additional revenue, and that gives you a sense of the delta that we face in our system. We also must acknowledge new challenges and realities that were not a part of the initial report. The increasing population of people with mental illness entering the jail on low-level offenses is at historic heights. The fate of the Affordable Care Act will determine our ability to pay for mental health and treatment services in the foreseeable future. Furthermore, we're facing a housing crisis that has made it increasingly difficult for people with criminal histories who are reentering the community post-incarceration to access safe, affordable housing. Finally, the plan identifies where the greatest needs are by agency moving forward. The plan provides practical steps to mitigate future challenges while taking advantage of efficiencies that flow from coordination and collaboration. It will also help guide funding recommendations to the board in future years. As we move through this presentation, please note that the agencies are not listed in any type of ranked order. Lastly, I want to publicly thank the staff from the Sheriff's Office, the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender Services of Lane County, the Department of Youth Services, Lane County Parole and Probation, sponsors, Lane County Behavioral Health, community-based treatment providers, Kids First, and the circuit courts, who all put considerable effort into the completion of this very robust report. So with that, I think we will launch in. As you see on this first slide, this details the phases. In Phase 1, we were really focused on addressing the most immediate needs to preserve current staffing and service levels from 2014 to 19. We are currently in Phase 2, or at least the timeline of Phase 2, if not all agencies are actually there, where we are focused on addressing the most critical system needs and restoring the county's ability to investigate and prosecute felony crimes, provide treatment and reentry services. And then in Phase 3, when we first started talking about Phase 3 in the early days of the report, we saw this as kind of pie in the sky. That these were the things in a perfect world, if we had all of the resources, this is where we wanted to be. As we have begun moving through Phase 2, we're actually starting to see the light of day in Phase 3, where some of these things may actually come to pass. We're also using a status bar with each agency to indicate where they are in the phases. Red being no progress made, yellow still in progress, green meaning that that work is complete. So the first agency up is the Sheriff's Office, Corrections Division. I'll turn it over to Sheriff Harold.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Commissioners, for letting us provide this report. And just want to echo a couple of comments that Paul made as far as the hydraulics of our criminal justice system, public safety system in Lane County, and the fact that the PICC gets together on a regular basis and has those conversations around the table about how each one of us have a role to play and a resource needs, and also how our agency impacts the next agency. And so having that group getting together is super beneficial, and I appreciate the work that's gone into this. As far as update for the Sheriff's Office, we definitely have rated that our Corrections Division is in progress for Phase 2. So certainly Phase 1 was keeping what we had, and we've done that, and we've made progress towards addressing critical system needs. We have 367 beds available in our jail now, which when this plan was originally drafted was not the case. And so that has had a significant reduction of CBRs, capacity-based releases from the jail. We do still have to acknowledge that we do still capacity-based release, predominantly on the weekends. Most of the time when court's in session, Monday through Friday, we aren't required to do so. But there is still a limitation as far as available beds at the Lane County Jail. And then also just remember, Monday through Friday, pretrial services, which is an arm of the court, they're still making releases. Releases that are through the courts, release on own recognizance or third-party release or release on bail. So those releases happen all the time. And those releases should happen when folks don't necessarily need to stay in jail pretrial. It's the CBRs, the capacity-based releases that continue to need to be addressed, because those are releases that don't come through the court. And so when those folks are released due to lack of capacity, there's not any connection to the court related to that. It's just we don't have room. Many other things going on in our Corrections Division, as you're aware of, with respect to the mentally ill that are housed there and our efforts to better address their behavior while they're in custody. And you've heard about those efforts. They're laudable. We've got 6 staff members that are mental health practitioners in our jail helping us. We've changed housing assignments. We've really gone outside of what we've done for decades with respect to classification and housing in order to better address the folks in custody that have mental health needs. And we're definitely proud of that program and seeing a lot of successes with it. So in progress for addressing critical system needs there.
If I may, Sheriff, I think this is one of the more pressing needs that we face in the system today, the number of people that are coming in on low-level offenses. And while we will talk later in this report about some of the efforts moving forward to create a crisis center and hopefully provide other opportunities, I think we can't understate what a challenge this is. The fact that our Lane County Jail is the largest provider of mental health services in the county is a sad commentary on the fact that so many of these people are winding up in the jail, and that is kind of the default response that we have today. Once they're there, the Sheriff's Office has no choice but to treat them.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. With respect to our Police Services Division, we have not made any progress as far as Phase 2. So Phase 1, keeping what we had, we've managed that, but there really hasn't been any progress made with respect to addressing continuing critical service needs. We oftentimes refer to the deputies that are deployed out of the main office as main office patrol, but the reality is that they really aren't patrolling their emergency response force. We talked about that a little bit at budget kickoff. We are considerably understaffed to provide the services that we do to over 100,000 people in unincorporated Lane County. And our response times and frankly, our inability to respond to some calls for service is indicative of that. I don't want to belabor the point. You have the report in front of you, excuse me, so you can read through sort of our stair-stepped things that we think that we would need to first address critical needs, and then that's before actually even thinking about Phase 3, which is additional appropriate needs.
Great. Next up is the District Attorney's Office, and they have actually completed Phase 2, and this was a major victory and stemmed from additional County General Fund support as well as grants to restore felony prosecution. In addition, a new DUI investigator was hired through an ODOT grant, which supports about 500 DUI cases and crashes annually. And Justice Reinvestment Grant Program dollars have helped fund the SB 416 program. The future gaps and needs, according to DA Perlow, one of the biggest challenges they face is space. Even if they were to hire more DAs, they don't have any place to put them. Hence the conversation that's coming up next about the courthouse. Moving forward in Phase 3, they're in progress. The biggest concerns are what would happen if staffing in the Sheriff's Patrol investigative resources were increased to an adequate level, the impact that that would have on case filings. Similarly, the number of new EPD officers who've been hired, it's unknown at this point, the impact, but clearly there will be more cases filed, and that will have an impact on the District Attorney's Office. And the last thing noted was the new courthouse, which speaks to the need for space for DA staff. Next up is the Public Defender Services of Lane County. As I mentioned, this is the first year they were included in the report. They are fully in Phase 2. This kind of lists the successes that they've had more recently, even though this is 19 to 22. So last session, the legislature, or the Oregon Public Defense Commission, allocated additional resources trying to move away from a case rate allocation process to the Public Defender Services in favor of an FTE model. So beginning in January, the state authorized new FTE positions to be hired at the Public Defender Service of Lane County, adding 3 new trial lawyers, an investigator, and a secretary. In addition, they secured a mental health treatment court grant that pays for a portion of an attorney that's funded through the CJC. Moving forward, the big thing that was noted was really narrowing the pay disparity gap between defense attorneys and district attorneys, which is still pretty profound. When you look down to Phase 3, it actually articulates how much it would cost to bring about parity between the offices, and it's about over $600,000 annually. The other issues noted were a database that would allow them to share court calendaring and the development of an expungement clinic with waived or reduced fees in partnership with community agencies. Next up is youth services. They are clearly in Phase 2 and have achieved a number of successes, some as a result of the public safety levy, doubling the number of detention beds and behavioral health treatment beds. We've added back staffing in community service unit, created full-time victims advocate position, tripled the number of bilingual staff, increased diversion services in 2019, implementing an impacts of crime class for youth receiving property or behavioral misdemeanor referrals, and expanded detention trauma-informed programming in 2019. They also have implemented consistent use of evidence-based risk assessment tools and protocols. Gaps and needs moving forward, 19 to 22, include additional funding for incentivizing youth for goal achievement and positive behavior, strategic action to address racial and ethnic disparities and promote equity, resources to take appropriate steps to reduce collateral consequences of youth system involvement, commitment to limited and constructive use of rules and sanctions and minimized use of confinement, and finally, enhancing prevention programs for youth and parents. Next up is parole and probation. They are clearly in progress in phase 2. The gaps and needs identified include specialized misdemeanor domestic violence supervision. Once upon a time, this was a service that was funded through county general fund dollars. With the community corrections grant and aid allocation that we receive from the state, those dollars are not available for misdemeanor supervision. So there is no available state funding that we can tap into for this process or for this use. According to the district attorney's office, last year, there were 180 individuals who received DV-related convictions. Approximately 2/3 of those wound up on bench probation instead of active supervision with parole and probation. And that's a big concern, because when on supervision, they receive the structure and support and accountability that you don't get on bench probation. To fully fund that would require 2 additional POs at the cost of $220,000 annually. PNP is relocating services, as I'm sure you are all aware. The cost of annual maintenance and services in the building is $100,000 a year. Additionally, to get caseload sizes down to the statewide level of an average of 45 for high-risk cases would require an additional 4.5 FTE at a cost of $495,000 annually. Moving into phase 3, the gaps and needs include reduced caseload sizes, focus on individual case plan and internal continuous quality improvement, treatment provider evaluations where they use a corrections program checklist and have a team of people come out and evaluate programs to ensure that they're meeting strict fidelity standards. That would require $95,000 annually for a senior program specialist. And finally, to continue to address risk, responsivity, and needs with the individuals on supervision. Next up is reentry services. This is something I know a little bit about. The program successes that we've achieved in phase 2 from 2014 to 19 are considerable. We've added 54 units of permanent supportive housing with the Oaks at 14th, leveraging over $9 million in tax credits and other resources. We added 17 transitional beds for men and women in 2018. We added Bothy Cottage, a 5-unit program for women with children in 2014. We added cognitive behavioral therapy groups at sponsors and in the Lane County Jail, where we've served over 1,500 individuals since we launched those programs a few years ago. And we launched the Lane Reentry Program, which we refer to as the RLAN program, in partnership with the Sheriff's Office, where we provide wraparound services to individuals releasing from DOC custody 60 days prior to their actual release date. And the other thing that I'll mention, and this isn't listed here, as of last Friday, we added 10 units of permanent supportive housing in the form of our tiny house project that we just completed construction of, which is very exciting. Moving forward, the gaps and needs that sponsors faces in the reentry front include sustaining a mentoring program, which was launched in 2010 with the Department of Justice grant. We're just wrapping up a randomized control trial. We've matched up over 1,000 individuals coming out of prison with volunteer mentors. It's grown into a model mentoring program that at this point is only partially funded, and it would require an additional $119,000 annually to fully fund that program. Similarly, we had a Department of Labor LEAP grant that provided funding for workforce readiness program in the jail, and also sustained our Reentry Resource Center, which is sponsors jobs program, where we employ between 25 and 50 people a month with criminal histories in full-time jobs. We would need about $112,000 annually to fully fund that program. And then the last thing is just the constant need for additional permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, access to market rate housing for people with conviction histories. In a community where we live with housing scarcity and the vacancy rates are extremely low, the median rents are high, it's very challenging for people with conviction histories who have minimal income to be able to compete on the open market. Last up, Phase 3, moving forward for 2022 to 25, Sustaining the Way Home, which is our permanent supportive housing project where we are serving 125 people in 100 units of housing in partnership with Homes for Good, Lane County Parole and Probation, and sponsors. The staffing costs for that program through 2025 would be $550,000 for all three agencies. In addition, in a perfect world, we would be able to add another 40 to 50 bed facility that's staffed 24 hours a day to address the needs of the local population releasing from the jail. At this point, 75% of our beds are dedicated to people coming out of prison. Only about 25% of them are for people coming out of the Lane County Jail. We also need additional space for parenting classes, DBT, CBD groups, and male parent visitation. And finally, if there were available resources, we would love to see the Our program expanded, as it has been very successful. Next up is behavioral health. Lane County Behavioral Health has achieved a number of successes between 2014 and 19, and they are clearly in progress in Phase 2. Those successes include implementation of Medicaid expansion as part of the Affordable Care Act, the Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice System Plan, which was developed by the Mental Health Summit, which is a very functional and well-attended meeting that meets monthly with anywhere from 30 to 50 people in attendance to really work on this intersection between mental health and criminal justice. The West Lane Mobile Crisis, where in 2019, a partnership between Lane County and Florence area community with services provided by Siuslaw Valley Fire and Rescue. Enhanced Jail Mental Health Services. The Fuse Project, which is collaboration between Lane County, the PSCC, and healthcare partners to really address the needs of those frequent utilizers of jail beds and emergency services. Community restoration for those under the Aid and Assist program, the 370 program. The legislature allocated additional funding last year to pay for 8 secure beds in Junction City and 8 additional residential beds through multiple treatment providers here locally. Finally, expansion of Medicaid-assisted treatment is also a big deal. And at this point, I believe a building has been secured, and they are in process of expanding services there. Moving forward, gaps and needs in 19 to 22 included the development of a mental health crisis center. There is state funding that's been made available through Senate Bill 973, which is called the Impacts Grant, which is really based on the justice reinvestment model on the criminal justice side. But they didn't want to call it mental health justice reinvestment because they thought it would get confused with the criminal justice reinvestment, hence the acronym Impacts. We have developed an ad hoc work group of the PSCC that is working on applying for those funding, that funding once it's released, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to apply for and receive up to $1 million or more to help with the funding of a crisis center locally. reducing the number of Lane County residents sent to the state hospital under the Aid and Assist program. As you may be aware, Lane County has been one of the higher utilizers of state hospital beds, and there's been quite a bit of pressure from the state for us to find other ways to work with these folks locally. The development of a low-barrier shelter, as indicated in the TAC report, where 75 low-barrier shelter and an additional 350 units of permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless have been called out. In addition, rural mobile mental health crisis systems. There are no services like Cahoots in the county outside of Eugene, Springfield, and Florence. And there's a significant unmet need for residential addiction treatment and medication-assisted treatment. Finally, the gaps and needs moving forward for 2022 to 2025 included integrated community crisis system and strong prevention and community engagement component. Community-based treatment, phase 2, very much in progress, made huge progress in large part because of the Affordable Care Act, which has pretty much reduced the wait list to provide pretty much immediate access to people who need drug and alcohol treatment, at least those that are criminal justice involved. And in part, in addition to the ACA funds, we use additional grant and aid dollars to subsidize treatment to ensure that we can get all of the folks that are on supervision into treatment. Contracted batter intervention program services that were funded through Justice Reinvestment Grant Program, expansion of peer supports to improve client treatment outcomes. Contracted sex offender treatment services have been expanded. And moving forward, actually in 19 to 22, the other gaps and needs identified included behavioral health integration, trauma-informed care, services to address intersections between treatment and public safety, and cognitive behavioral sex offender treatment with fidelity to the model. Finally, in phase 3, no progress has been made. The biggest concern is what will happen if the Affordable Care Act goes away. And we anticipate that this would require at least about $388,000 per biennium in increased contract costs to offset the subsidies. Fully implementing an evidence-based sex offender treatment program and possible need for additional treatment slots. Next up is Kids First, and they have made some pretty significant progress in recent years. Probably the biggest thing is their new facility, which they moved into in December of 19, which allows them now to serve 2 families at once and provides 9,000 square feet of services for, 9,000 square feet of a facility for services. In addition, they've increased staffing levels to 11 FTE. The gaps and needs moving forward are additional mental health staffing. Despite the increases, caseloads are still higher than average, and an additional 8.5 FTE is needed to support the need and demand for prompt specialized mental health assessment and services for children who've experienced trauma. That would cost approximately $775,000 annually. In phase 3, the gaps and needs include child sexual assault prevention. Sexual assault prevention work is needed, including training and outreach, as well as an evidence-based treatment for youth with problematic sexual behaviors. This would cost about $250,000 annually to hire an additional licensed mental health provider, case manager, and program manager. Last up, but not least in importance, is the circuit court. Well, in phase 2, there's a renewed focus on pretrial releases at the state level that will make sustaining local funding continuously critical. Problem-solving courts, the courts have instituted or expanded on a number of problem-solving courts, but there's still a need to sustain grant funding for treatment courts, veterans court, mental health court, and the juvenile RAP courts. There are serious security concerns that result from the current design of the courthouse, And moving into Phase 3, juvenile treatment court funding is needed for an additional .5 FTE juvenile treatment court coordinator, which is temporarily funded through June of 2021 by the Circuit Court. Additionally, the courthouse replacement, which is next up on the agenda, is sorely needed as identified by studies, and the need for better job security, access to alter-abled persons, improved conditions for jurors, and replacement of the aged and decrepit infrastructure. Finally, additional judges. Recent workload studies by the National Center of State Courts concluded that Lane County needs 2 more full-time circuit court judges to handle the caseload. And that concludes a synopsis of the report. With that,
Thank
we
you
will
very
entertain
much.
any questions.
It's a great report. Any comments? Commissioner Farr?
You know, first I'd like to compliment Commissioner Bozovich on the work that you've historically done with the PSCC Public Safety Coordinating Council. It's been ongoing work, and I see a number of folks in the audience, Captain Riley and Chief Wilkerson, who are also here as a part of the work. I mean, it's tireless the work you do, Jay, not just here in the county, but with AOC and with NACO, the work that you focus on getting the funds in place and getting the coordination in place to make the system work more smoothly together. And, you know, the report that you've given us today is an encyclopedia. You know, you go through there, you have bullet points on there that each one of those bullet points you can research, you can click on it and go to the great depth of work that's gone into providing the resources and providing the coordination that's involved. I'm only going to talk a few minutes. We could talk for hours about this, about what's going on. But really, I think a little bit more about diversion, intervention, and directing people away from the criminal justice system into more appropriate treatment. Crisis center, you know, we talk about that regularly, 10, 20, 30, 40 times a week we're talking about the need for a crisis center. And the Board of Commissioners put $1 million into the project for this current budget cycle, looking to see what happens for the future. But a great deal of effort is being placed into that. Without going into too much detail, the Mental Health Summit is a topic that's discussed every Thursday that they meet once a month. And really, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we need to continue to work on the crisis center and make certain that we're looking at the model that's going to most appropriately work in Lane County. The second question that I have regarding diversion and flow into our criminal justice system is something that you said. The number of new EPD officers who have been hired will have an impact on jail services. So my question there, can you talk a little bit about how is the new revenue stream for the Eugene Police Department in hiring new officers, how is any of that being diverted to make certain that the downstream, that our reception center, so to speak, is being funded in a way that's going to handle the additional bodies that are being sent their way?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, I think this is a question for Sheriff Harold, but to my knowledge, no additional resources have been diverted to assist with the impact. Sheriff.
That's accurate. I'm excuse me, unaware that any such conversation has taken place.
Then it seems to me that perhaps there is a need for that conversation because, you know, the people of Eugene are, well, the additional revenue that's being directed toward the police department doesn't do any good if we're not able to handle the workload, the increased workload that is provided to Captain Riley and others in Lane County. So, and maybe you can make recommendations as to we as a Board of County Commissioners can help leverage the need for that, because it really is a conversation we have to have.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, in recent conversations with DA Perlow, it's unclear what the impact is going to be, but clearly the impact will be felt first by the District Attorney's Office and secondly by the Corrections Division of the Sheriff's Office. So when we think about resources, I think we need to throw the DA's office into the conversation as well.
And while it's unclear, it's certainly there. And before we have an opportunity to focus on it, we need to make certain that we are aware that it's going to happen. The clarity of it will become evident, but the the necessity is absolutely there. So I think as a Board of Commissioners, we need input as to how we can help work with the City Council perhaps, or how administration can help with administration to make sure that, that the balance of workload is achieved through the funding that's recently been directed toward the Eugene Police Department. The other thing that I will say is that you have, we can talk about Kids Service, we can talk about reentry services, we can talk about circuit court, all of the things that you've included in this, but it's an ongoing conversation. Hopefully this is just a start of the attention that we need to focus on to make sure you have the resources and that we're able to slow down the flow of people coming into the jail, or into the criminal justice system in general. You know, you mentioned the aid and assist, the 370 population, and how we are burdening the state system. Well, many people don't understand that the people that we're sending to the state are there simply they're not there for treatment. That's right. They're not going for treatment. They're not going to come back with any form of treatment. They're going to come back, if in fact they do, being able to help themselves more in the criminal case, in the court. They're not going there to be treated. And all of the money that is being spent by the state and all of the resources that they are suggesting we're using aren't being used to help people, other than help them defend themselves. So it's an important discussion that we need to have. How do we find ways inside of our system right here in Lane County to directly affect the people who need services instead of incarceration? So once again, a lot to be said about it. This is a wonderful report. Susan, thank you very much for your part in it, and thank you to everybody who you listed early. Now, when you were listing thanks of people who did participate in this, did I miss municipal police departments?
They were not a part of this report, in part because we focused on county government agencies and those partners that really impacted the system locally at the county level.
So while they are present at PSCC, they're not necessarily present in the identification of the needs that are outlined in this report. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair Buck, for allowing me more time than I would like to have taken.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I wanted to ask a little bit for all three of you on this matter of people being cut off from their Medicaid benefits when they're brought into the jail. Do we know how much money that is? Have an idea?
When you say how much money that is, are you referring to the Medicaid costs or the costs that the jail is absorbing because
they're not,
they don't have Medicaid
exactly,
benefits?
the cost that the local taxpayer or the jail is absorbing because the person is not eligible under federal law for that. Is that?
I don't think we've made any
Millions,
calculation
thousands?
on dollar amounts. We've been plugged into conversations about trying to lobby for that to change. Captain Riley's been plugged in with the jail commanders group in the state, but I don't think we've ever calculated the dollar amount.
Well, that's part of our United Front thing, and it's on my mind because I spent some time trying to explain that, hopefully better than I just explained it, to other people reading out of the book, I might add, just to reassure you that the message was clear. But the National Association of Counties, they told us they're in a discussion with the National Sheriff's Association. They believe that that will be a resolution brought up at the NACO convention. And I'm not one of the commissioners going to the summer NACO convention, but the ones that are definitely need to be ready to push that and support it. Some other county somewhere else is pushing it, but we're supportive of it. Also, the congressional delegation is very well aware of this issue, and they're very plugged into it, and they want to help us. So whatever you can do, Sheriff or Captain Riley, to advance this on the sheriff's side of the equation, it'd be great. And I think having a firm number, or at least a rough number, would be really helpful with both Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley and Congressman DeFazio. So I would like to see that pursue, maybe because I know, Sheriff, you're on the legislative committee, you could bring that in and maybe we could get a letter to the congressional delegation just following up that we think that's an important issue. And here's how much money it costs us, or the taxpayers. So, just an idea for follow-up, because I do think that at least our delegation was quite interested in knowing more about it and pretty knowledgeable about it. So if there's anything pending in Congress to do something about it, we might want to alert them too that that's something they could support. Thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, just a minute, I'll have Susan talk for a
Just
moment.
very quickly, just to respond a little bit. For a very long period of time, people completely lost their benefits when they entered jail. They were just gone. So when they got out, they had to completely re-enroll. And there was a lot of work done on a national level, but also right here in Lane County, to ensure that people didn't lose them and to ensure that when they're released, they get right back on. So I think as far as just the human impact on people who are losing those benefits is lessened, at least by the people here locally within the jail who work to make sure that they don't lose them entirely and that they're reconnected.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. Before we leave this topic, I never can remember CFMG's new name, but what's our current annual contract with them, dollar amount?
A little over 4 million.
So if you want to understand what the impact of not continuing Medicaid coverage is, seeing a major portion of our jail population is Medicaid eligible, we're spending over $4 million a year on medical services in the jail. Just so that's your dollar amount right there. And I have, long advocated for the fact that most of the folks coming into our jail have not been adjudicated. They haven't been found actually guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, yet they're losing their rights to benefits as a U.S. citizen in that process. That has to change. That's just a clear violation, I think, of the rights of those citizens to suddenly lose a benefit purely because they've been charged with a crime but not sentenced or tried and convicted. So that to me is a major distinction between, the folks that go to prison and lose their Medicaid benefits versus the folks, that are in our jail. I also want to clarify real quick, because it was stated a couple times about Lane County being a high user of the state hospital. Let me make it perfectly clear right now, no one drawing a Lane County paycheck sends anybody to the state hospital. No one. Municipal court judges and circuit court judges can send somebody to the state hospital on aid and assist. No one drawing a Lane County paycheck. That constant drumbeat of Lane County's overusing the state hospital has people come to us and ask us what we're doing about it. We're not the ones putting people there. Now, there's reasons why Lane County has a high population for that, but just to be clear, no one drawing a Lane County paycheck sends anybody to the state hospital. In fact, the majority are folks that are drawing municipal paychecks from municipal courts. Just to be clear. So I just want to clarify those two things real quick, but I want to get on to some other things, because this is a great plan and a lot of work has gone into it. But I want to note, and you probably heard it over and over again during the presentation, to do this, it's going to cost this much a year. To do that, or to replace that, if Medicaid stuff gets withdrawn, will cost this much a year. It's all about operational funding. That's why I kind of brought the whole issue about operational funding for the SERBU pods up. That's what we're short on, is this operational funding. And I've spent a significant amount of time out in my district the last couple of weeks, and I'm telling you, there's not a lot of appetite for asking local people for more operational funding, at least out in my district, which is, there's a fatigue going on right now. And I am concerned that we've kind of walked away from the over 50% of Lane County that's not paying taxes and working towards getting them to support operational funding. That's our federal force. And the fact that we've walked away from the one organization that was advocating to have those federal forests continue to contribute into our general fund through the ONC lands, that we need to keep working on that issue, because could be a huge amount of that operational funding. It's one of the reasons why we're 58 million behind Marion County, because we had a tax rate that was set at a time when those federal lands were contributing to our county coffers. So I just want to make that clear, that we need to think about those operational costs and how we're going to replace those funds, because I don't think we're ever going to successfully get all those funds replaced through local taxation. I do want to just make a quick note that I was in Florence quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, and that new mobile crisis unit has been stood up. And I heard from former sheriff, now Chief Turner, and also from his staff, how great that's been since it's been stood up. And what a great thing that is to have that intervention of those folks that are truly just in mental health crisis, not in criminal crisis, by a mental health specialist. They are looking forward to ultimately having it expand into rural Lane County. The problem is it has to have public safety backup to it. So as we think about this plan, one of the things that I think stands out like a sore thumb is the only thing that hasn't really moved off of just trying to keep what we have is rural patrol. Our ability to expand mental health mobile services is limited because we don't have rural patrol. Folks are getting so far down the path of addiction and having their mental health compromised because we don't have enough rural patrol to get people when they first start criminogenic behavior due to addiction. We have to do something about rural patrol in this county. It has to be a priority.
Commissioner Bernie?
Thank you. It's a hell of a plan. The nuances are fascinating in terms of, we're going through this budget process now again as a county, and I keep hearing the word structural balance, but really we're systemically imbalanced, is what I keep sensing. And I don't agree with some of the analysis that was just shared, but I do agree that for me, the whole notion of rural patrol, now after a year, Sheriff, is so integral to prevention and so related to the impacts on all of the other pieces of this. I found it fascinating, the discussion that Commissioner Farr initiated, talking about the increase in Eugene police patrol and services and the impacts on the rest of the system. As it relates to that, I would suggest some sort of, formal acknowledgement from us to the city of Eugene, identifying that we will be looking at the impacts on our district attorney office, on our jail, et cetera, and we will be we will suggest that we'll be coming to them expecting partnership and assistance with those increased costs to the system, given the interconnections. My hat's off to the heart and the work. I also agree with Commissioner Sorensen. My experience with Congress people and senators and electeds is you give them a number, whether that number is entirely correct or not, and it gives them something to work with, it gives them something to advocate for, and it's useful moving the needle. So I do encourage, because there are numerous parts of this report where in my head I was like, I wonder how much that would cost. I don't see a budget number here. I would encourage educated guesses. Nuance it any way you want so no one holds you liable if you're wrong, but give us some targets that we can advocate for on your behalf. But thank you very, very, very much. I think you have all of our admiration, support, and trying to figure this out with you.
Thank you. Every what clearly jumps out at most of us is almost every category is in phase 2, except that rural patrol is not in. I know, I feel the same way that if we don't pick that up somehow, it's going to be more and more challenging for everybody else to get into phase 3 without being able to bring it along as well. And we're not talking about little amounts of money, though. So this is one of our most expensive aspects of the system, and trying to get millions of dollars in order to cover that gap, I know has been just so challenging for all of you working so hard on it. I am dedicated to helping however I can in supporting you in that. I know that there's been some discussions up the McKinsey, and people are talking about it a lot now for the districts that might be the next concept to test the waters in. I look forward to seeing how that goes through the 2020 year and see if that's any partial solution. And then if there's other things in which we can help advocate for that, I know that you know our doors are open and we want to help support you in any way we can. The short session, I believe we're going to be advocating for more parole funding. Can you tell us the status of that?
Yes, Chair Buck, Commissioners. At this point in time, there is a $25 million ask moving forward for grant and aid funds. And these are the dollars that come to the county to pay for parole and probation, sanctioned beds at the jail, and other public safety supports. The original ask was for $50 million based on a time study that was done that gave actual costs to supervise people on parole and probation. It died in the long session, got brought back up, and now the $25 million that they're talking about would be for the second year of the biennium, and could reset the baseline for parole and probation's allocation on a biannual basis, meaning that beginning 21-23, we would be looking at about a $50 million increase. Lane County's roughly 10%, a little less than 10% of the state. So if that money comes through, we would be looking at a little over $2 million for the second year of the biennium. Having said that, there were services that were cut. Parole and probation held a bunch of positions open. So there are some needs already that need to be addressed before we can think about funding additional or new services. The other issue, which I'm sure you're all aware of, is the possibility that there won't be a session. And if that comes to pass, there have been discussions around prioritizing this for an e-board ask. So one way or another, folks seem to be pretty optimistic about the possibility of getting additional grant and aid dollars this year. Commissioner
Bozovich.
If you don't mind me adding to that, because I did attend a meeting with the co-chairs of Ways and Means last Monday about this specific ask and all. One of the things that the co-chairs expressed was a concern about resetting the rate per, doing it for the second half of the biennium, but resetting the rate because they're not convinced they're getting their money's worth. They have concerns over the fact that recidivism has climbed slightly in this state overall across the board over the years, even though they're investing more and more money into community corrections as they see it. I disagree with that analysis, but one of the things they're pushing hard for is tying the $25 million to a commitment to look at system reform and effectiveness of the system. So it's not going to come without strings, I'm pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to do a reset on the hourly rate. Just my sense of what I was hearing from the co-chairs in that meeting. You know, I don't think it's unfortunate because it's a very complex set of variables, and our recidivism rate is not completely dependent on our efforts under community corrections. That has a lot to do with everything from the opioid crisis to the downturn in the economy in 2008 to all sorts of issues that impact that rate that it's hard to put in that. You know, the time study, I thought, clearly demonstrated what it actually takes to supervise somebody, you know, now that we're not just tailing and jailing in parole and probation, which was the old model. You've heard that term. Basically, the idea was to follow parolees around, wait till they did something stupid, and throw them back in the hoosegow. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. We try and help them be successful instead of trying to throw them back, because we understand it's a whole lot less costly if we do get them to be successful. That takes a lot more time, though, than tail and jail, and a lot more commitment, a lot more training for the staff. You know, so that recognition. Yet still, we're seeing some numbers go the wrong way as far as the state thinks on recidivism and the co-chairs, and so there's a pushback going on. So it does look like we'll get that 25 million. That was kind of, that number seemed to be pretty well agreed on. How it's handed over, I think, is going to have strings.
Chair Buck, Commissioners, in conclusion, I think one of the things that I hope you walk away with is a recognition that we have made significant progress, but that we still have work to do, and we've put price tags on these things intentionally, not to give you sticker shock, but to illustrate that we have a roadmap. And as we move forward, we will use this as a guide in making funding recommendations to the board. And back to the rural patrol conversation, yes, it's a big ticket number, but you know, one of the things that was brought up is every additional deputy sheriff makes a difference. So, you know, in just maintaining what we have, there's a need to bring on additional deputies. So I just want that to be in the back of your mind too, that it's not an all or nothing proposition. And hopefully, as we move forward, we can begin ticking off the boxes as we make progress on these very necessary functions in our public safety system.
Thanks. First, I know this is really petty, but I want to say this because it's a matter of public record, and I keep getting comments from various people, some of whom are actually my constituents, about costs here, that I don't know how you went through all that, Paul. That was remarkable. But one of the things you did say at the end about when talking about the new courthouse was needed for better job security, and I just want to point out you didn't mean that. You meant better security. Yeah, I just want everybody here to be aware of that. Yeah. I also had the opportunity to speak to one of the co-chairs of Ways and Means over the weekend, and he was very complimentary of our commissioners, Commissioner Bozovich's participation, and seemed very bullish about that 25 million being approved for next year. Oh, well, I hope there's a session. There was one other thing I wanted to share, but honestly, I can't recall what it was. I apologize.
Well, thank you very much. It may come up again in your mind in the next item. So we'll, with that, we'll move on to agenda item 7C, which is this.
There needs to be a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, yes. I would entertain a motion to approve Order 20-02-04-03 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozovich, second by Commissioner Bernie. Any discussion? Great. All those in approval, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Sorry, I almost left you without that.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we'll move on to the discussion about the Lane County Justice Center update. Everybody who's involved with that, feel free to move forward to the table. And when you're ready, Mr. Mokaiski, you can start us off.
Thank you, Chair. Just inviting our partners to the table here. I want to start by introducing, of course, you know all these folks, but for those watching, Sheriff Cliff Harold, presiding judge of the Lane County Circuit Court, Deborah Vogt, and our Lane County District Attorney, Patty Perlow. Here they will each share, and then Devin Ashbridge, our Public Information Officer, is here as well. We have a few slides that will show you. Each of our elected officials will share some comments with you, but I want to just walk through kind of an overview of what's in your packet, the report that we have, and talk a little bit about the process. Our goal here has always been to identify a responsible proposal that addresses the significant safety, security, and inefficiencies that exist in the current Lane County Courthouse, to add value to the community while ensuring the highest and best use of our taxpayers' limited resources. And we over the last several months have gone through an extensive process to continue to refine the proposal to narrow in on one that we believe voters will find the most attractive. So I want to do a little bit of a recap of history. We're not going to go back to when the earth cooled. We're not going to start in 1959 when the current Lane County Courthouse was built with 4 courtrooms. It was built with 4. So imagine a building built with its intended purpose, 4 courtrooms, and over the course of the past 60 years has been expanded to 15 courtrooms. More than almost 4 times the number of courtrooms it was originally built for. We're not going to go back to that period. We're not going to go back to 2015 when the needs assessment report was completed, an independent and complete assessment of the building's performance and projections for the future that was done by the National Center for State Courts. We're not going to go back to 2017 when we did extensive siting assessment and study with the City of Eugene that resulted in a purchase and sale agreement to acquire a full block for the Justice Center that we now have. And we're not going to go back to 2018 when we completed with Robertson Sherwin Architects and DLR Group the scoping study that refined the square footage for the new Justice Center to accommodate current and future uses. And of course, that study included recommendations for potential floor plan diagrams that would address the concerns regarding security and access for people with mobility issues. So we're not going to talk about any of those things. I just want to start in April, or I should say August 9th of 2019. Of course, we had a measure on the ballot last May that received 42% support from voters. In August 9th of 2019, Governor Brown signed into law House Bill 5005, which among other things included the ability for authorize the state of Oregon to issue a general obligation bond in the amount of $87.6 million for the Lane County Courthouse replacement project, in addition to this $6.4 million that had been previously authorized by the legislature. The total state funding for this project comes to $94 million. So in August, after the election, that happened. On September 24th, the project team brought forward to the Board of Commissioners an update on this discussion, along with the election results and our planned public outreach. I should say on the August signing of House Bill 5005, we also had worked through a process to allow for that funding, which was uncertain at the time of the election. We allowed for that funding to be available until and allocated for Lane County's project until it is issued, which is anticipated for February or March of 2021. So that funding remains on the table for us to utilize, but we are going to have to come up with matching funding by the time that that funding is put forward by the state. In the fall of 2019, since that update that we provided to the the project team began working closely with Robertson Sherwood Architects and DLR Group, along with our internal stakeholder team, to reevaluate all the assumptions that were made about the previously proposed building and to look for opportunities to be more responsive to community feedback. We recognize that, you know, we want this, we know that we need this project to move forward and that there's funding available from the state and we have limited time to do that. And so we need to really look back and understand what were the things that voters told us in the exit process and in the survey that followed the election. And so along with that reevaluation work, which I'll touch on in a minute, we also conducted an online survey that was released, as well as 8 public input sessions that were hosted in Eugene, Springfield, Oak Ridge, Florence, Cottage Grove, and Veneta. And I want to just show, you see some pictures up here from those outreach sessions, and they really, it was, and we will do a scientific survey. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're planning on doing that voter survey, scientific voter survey here in a few months that we'll bring back to the board, but we really wanted to have an online opportunity for people to weigh in and provide some comments, as well as this in-person feedback with folks. And so we went out and we shared information. We asked for people to give us their thoughts and feedback. And here, there were several clear themes that we heard from both the online survey and from the in-person discussions that we had throughout Lane County. We heard be reasonable and practical. We don't need anything flashy. We heard put safety first. Getting justice, getting access to justice shouldn't be a dangerous proposition. We heard a desire for fair and equal access for jurors, for victims, for defendants, for staff. We heard a desire to ensure privacy, including safe space to allow people to meet with lawyers privately, to access victim services, and to have confidential conversations. Those things currently do not exist in the way that people that we, certainly as we understand them, to be needed, and from what we heard from folks that we engage with. And then we heard consistently, spend wisely. Get our money's worth by building efficiently and with quality materials. So those are some of the themes that we heard through the online survey. We also heard some confusion around, Lane County versus City of Eugene buildings, federal courthouse, so this Lane County courthouse versus federal courthouse. So there remains some sort of, little bit of confusion around the governmental entities and the buildings and facilities and where all these things are going to happen and what they're intended to, how they're intended to serve the community. So we know that there are ongoing efforts. We need to ensure residents know which buildings and which government are involved with the Lane County Justice Center effort. So I'm going to ask Devin just to walk through, while we're on the topic of public engagement, what next steps related to public engagement will look like.
So commissioners, if you remember, we shared with you this outline in September, and we are now in what we have been calling entering into phase 2. And so we've taken what we learned from the outreach sessions in our communities, as well as the informal online survey, and we are preparing to take this information, take some of what we are proposing for changes, and host a series of focus groups for groups that work within the courthouse and have a very vested stake in what happens there, as well as the general public. We are planning to be in the field with a formal scientific survey in March, so coming up very quickly, and to be able to bring all that we learn through those together back to the board in early April for some additional guidance. But we're excited to have reached the point where we're able to start sharing some of what we have learned and how we are responding to what we've learned with our community, and find out more about whether we're hitting the target.
So I want to shift gears. Did you want to share the website? Did you mention that?
We do have a website set up. It's lanejusticecenter.org. It's where we will continue to update content, including opportunities to provide feedback. We had been hosting the online survey through this website. We have FAQs, reports and studies that Steve had mentioned. So we want to make sure that this is a one-stop place for people to get their questions answered and get more information about the process.
So I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the reevaluation of our assumptions. As I shared at the front end, we've been several years in intensively and thoughtfully planning this work. This has not been a Usain Bolt-like sprint. This has been more like a Steve Prefontaine 10,000 meter. So we've been going at a good clip, but it's been very thoughtful, very diligent, and for several years. And all of that planning effort has been needed, but also understanding that we have to coincide with this $90 million in state funding that is sitting on the table for us to leverage, and the project really would not be possible to achieve if not for that available state funding. So we really have stepped back after May's election, reevaluated, tried to understand where there were concerns, questions, information sharing, additional education, and make sure that whatever changes we make to the project are responsive to what we heard from voters, because we can't move forward and fix all of the challenges that we know exist, improve the efficiency and effectiveness and collaboration of our justice system if voters don't see the value in what is being proposed. I want to start by saying, we had the folks here at the table and many others that are stakeholder partners in the room having conversations over several months. I've worked in county government, 3 different counties in 3 different states over 20 plus years. I've worked with my fair share of sheriffs and presiding judges and district attorneys and commissioners. And never have I seen less ego and less of a concern about individual areas that people are trying to protect. And there's always that natural inclination that, you have to make sure that we're advocating for individual interests. But I just want to say that in all of these conversations that we've had really throughout this process, but particularly over the last several months, the only thing I've heard from the people around the table who've been involved in this is what is in the best interest of our community, what is in the best interest of the people that we serve, what is in the best interest of the taxpayers who are going to help pay for these services, and what's in the best interest of justice in Lane County. That has been the consistent theme. And so it really has been for me, an eye-opening process to see folks that are elected to represent individuals, to serve a particular need in the community. And they've done that throughout this process, but they really have been unselfish and collaborative in the way that we've tried to look. So a lot of things were put on the table, and a lot of things at the end of the process were excluded from the proposal that we're bringing forward to you today because of the thought and diligence at really evaluating all these things and going, that's not going to work. And oftentimes it was other partners that would say that proposal is going to work, even though it didn't necessarily directly affect them. So that I just wanted to paint that sort of picture for you, that it was, I just was really encouraged by the collaboration and the unselfishness that unfolded throughout this process. So we looked with our project partners, Robertson Sherwood Architects and DLR Group, to refine the original building proposal. We looked at many revisions, several different scenarios. We costed out different options. We weighed all of those against community feedback. We had a focus on making sure that the result would be operating efficiently, serving Lane County for generations to come. So we had both what are the current issues and short-term needs, but what are the long-term interests of our community for future generations, and how do we solve those core issues that are faced in the current building. So the refined proposal, I'm just going to get to the the conclusion here and then step back for a second and share with you how we got to some of that. The refined proposal that we will share and seek public feedback in late February includes several important changes. Those include the reduction in a number of courtrooms from 18 to 16 courtrooms, the elimination of on-site evidence storage, the reduction of excavation associated with underground parking, the elimination of parole and probation office space, and a reduction in the number of jury deliberation rooms and holding cells. We wanted to make sure, and I think, the presiding judge is here and certainly can talk about the courtrooms. We want to make sure that we have space to efficiently provide service and for the needs now and in the future of the courts. There is part of this proposal, we're thinking about in addressing how we can provide the space necessary for today, the today's needs and the immediate future, but also allowing for conversion of existing space into future courtrooms, and by allowing for operations that can be easily relocated to other functions without a lot of additional investment in the future. The reduction in courtrooms from the original proposal will allow for corresponding reduction in the number of jury deliberation rooms and holding cells required. And the result of all of this work, we've updated the cost estimates, and we believe that these changes will help meet our goal of reducing the overall construction cost by more than $20 million from the original project costs that were proposed. Important to note that construction costs continue to rise at an average of 6.5% annually, and we continue to look at that and how can we make adjustments in the project to make sure that every dollar that we save in construction from these refinements are a dollar for dollar savings in that project. So again, we continue to look at refining those costs, and we'll come back with a more detailed and refined cost for the board and the public in the next few months, but we believe at this point that the overall reduction will be in excess of $20 million. But it also calls to our attention the need and the element of urgency in moving forward to make sure that we can both seek, achieve the state funding that's on the table and make sure that the escalation of costs for construction do not continue to grow. So I want to just touch, there were a lot of, I mentioned that there were a lot of things that were looked at, and a few examples of those. We looked at relocation of the district attorney's office in space other than the Justice Center. We looked at removal of the sheriff's office from the Justice Center and into other space. We looked at the elimination of underground parking altogether. We looked at including the secure underground sally port for inmate transport above ground. We looked at the elimination of victim services space and the reduction in the number of courtrooms with access to secure inmate delivery. All of those things were evaluated. We had costs associated with them. We had thoughtful discussion about, well, why can't the DA go over here? What would happen if the sheriff was in this space? What about victim services? A realistic comment, not a hypothetical, but really what would that look like? What are the pros and cons of those different scenarios? And the proposal that we bring forward to you today was reached as a result of all of that thoughtful analysis and discussion with the project partners. So we feel confident that what we're bringing forward to you today is going to will address the core issues that exist in the current building, will meet the current and immediate future needs of the justice system in the future, will allow for the efficiencies and the effectiveness and collaboration in the justice system to continue to flourish, while also reducing the total cost by over $20 million. So these other things that the other potential changes that we looked at could have resulted in savings, but they would have come with, would have been more than offset by inefficiencies or other cost drivers that made them, we felt, not feasible in the end. I think it's really important to stress, because I mentioned at the beginning, the current 1959 courthouse building was built with 4 courtrooms to address the needs of the justice system in 1959. We are now, after years of thoughtfully planning a building that will address the Justice Center needs for the community over the next 50 years. We anticipate the building will last for up to 100 years, but we're planning for a 50-year operational use. So we're thoughtfully planning out that period of time. And importantly, the universally sized courtrooms with secure inmate delivery will provide the efficiency that is currently lacking in the current courthouse's hodgepodge of courtrooms that cannot hold the full range of case types that can be assigned to each judge. Secure inmate delivery has also been identified as one of the most concerning issues in the courthouse. So that universally sized courtroom is really a key component of not only meeting the current needs, but the future needs of justice in our community. So again, this is, we believe, the responsible proposal that continues to address the significant safety, security, and inefficiencies in the building that exist. It adds value to the community in the way that we have always intended that this new facility would do, and it ensures the highest and best use of every single taxpayer dollar that we would be asking to use. So as Devin mentioned, the public outreach is ongoing, and it will continue over the next several months, including a scientific survey of registered voters, including a public open house on March 12th to gather feedback from interested residents, and our laneJusticeCenter.org website where people can get more information. And now I want to stop my comments and ask for the presiding judge and then the district attorney and the sheriff to provide you with their thoughts both on the process that we've gone through and the current state of the courthouse as it exists today.
So I'm not going to talk a lot about the needs because we all know the needs, and I've talked to you about the needs before. They haven't changed, you know, they just get worse every day. So I don't think I need to go there because we all know the need. About the process, I just wanted to comment about the process because I thought it was a very thorough process. Going through each of the kind of big ticket items in this building and then figuring out how much they all cost and then how much things would cost if you have to relocate different agencies into other buildings that may or may not even exist right now, and taking into account that cost with trying to figure out how, you know, how we get the most bang for our buck and still have a building that's going to do what we need it to do and do it into the future. I thought that those conversations had by everyone involved were really very thorough, and I was really impressed with those conversations. I was very impressed with how everyone was just being very frank about what would happen if, what we could do if, that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to assure you that from my perspective, I thought they were very, very thorough. The need hasn't changed as far as making this, you know, hopefully a 100-year building, that we really are going to need the extra courtrooms that right now we're not anticipating that we're taking back, because basically it's getting rid of a floor. But the way we've talked to architects about that is that there's some built-in space where when we do need those, they can be incorporated into what we're already talking about, which I thought was very important, so that we aren't having to say we have to build a whole new structure or something in the future to get those two courtrooms. And so the architects were, I felt they had really meaningful input on some of that stuff to reassure us that we still are going to be able to go out into the future the way we need to. So I really wanted to comment about that process and thank everybody for all of their input. They've gone to an extreme amount of work to try to get to a proposal that is really, as I said, the best bang for our buck, and really makes this a justice center that's going to have everything in it that needs to be in it.
I can't really add much to that other than how much I appreciate the advice that we've been receiving as a group. Robertson Sherwood and DLR Group have been terrific in guiding us through the process. The assistance of everybody who's attended those meetings. I mean, we aren't building experts. And so that they could break it down for us into a meaningful way that we could understand the concepts and make decisions based upon the advice that they've provided has been really helpful. So kudos to the county for picking up those particular advisors for us.
And all the good stuff's already been said, so I'll repeat it. The folks we've been working with, the project team, the county staff, Mike Penwell, and all the folks, really did do a great job of walking us through the process. So it was, as you know, quite challenging because we heard back from the community some of the things that they asked us to do. And frankly, as long-term county folks, that's exactly what we did the first go-around, really. I mean, the first plan was not lavish and grandiose because that's not Lane County. And so, but we heard the voters, and to come back to go through a process where we felt like we worked really hard on the first go-around to not build anything grandiose, they just stepped us through a process that was excellent. And I'll be honest, the first meeting I went to, it felt like an impossible task. But the project team walking us through the project and the advice from folks like DLR that how we could accomplish the same goals, not give up the operational efficiencies that we experience today because we are co-located in a justice center. So we get to keep those. We get to improve security considerably with this plan from what we have today. And also be responsive to the voters in what we heard back from them. So kudos to the team, and I appreciate the good guidance that we've been given.
Thank you. Any comments from the board? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. This is a great proposal, and Ms. Mokryski, thanks for delineating what it is that the public has responded to. Now, as we move forward, I'm thinking back on several times that we put forward a library bond with the city of Eugene, and it failed a couple of times. Failed miserably, failed less miserably, and then passed. And what happened that made it pass the third time? And, I'm looking back on the adjustments that we made in the ask and the presentation that we made. And what we discovered, and what I really became attuned to, is we did not, our message didn't resonate with enough people. Now, while the message resonated with certain parts of town, there were other parts of town that really needed to hear a different message. And as we move forward, what is going to be the resonance? What is going to be, what is going to paint the clear picture or put the taste of salt in people's mouths regarding the need for the new Justice Center? We sitting in the room don't dispute that. We can taste it. We know it. We've seen it. We've walked the halls. But most people haven't walked the halls, and most people would rather not walk the halls ever in their lifetime. And so how do we appeal to the folks who would rather just not have a courthouse, or would rather not be involved in the courthouse at any level? How do we do that? And how do we do it with the library? We did a couple of things that you're mentioning. We began to get universal support from different groups who potentially wouldn't have supported it. And then we began to deliver a message to people in different parts of the community. Now, in this case, it's people all the way from Hasita Head Lighthouse to the top of the Three Sisters. How do we deliver the message to them? The same truthful message, the same accurate portrayal of the needs, and the same description of what we're going to of the product that we're going to provide, but in terms that they understand. It's why do you need a courthouse? And I think part of what we need to do, Judge Vogt, and I'm looking at you specifically because you're the one that spends your entire life, and I think probably at least 60% of your life in that building. What is the risk? What is the risk to the people living in Bethel? What is the risk to the people living in Walton if we don't build a courthouse? And I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, start delineating the risk, but what are the risks? What do we lose if we don't get the courthouse? I think we've done a good job of portraying what we're going to deliver and what we're going to give, but perhaps people need to understand what's the downside. What do we lose? What am I not going to get? And that's, as I personally move forward, that's a message that I'd like to deliver to the people of Bethel and to the people of Walton, to name a couple, is what are they specifically going to get from this this new building that's not wonderful. It's not a wonderful building. It's a functional building. And it's not a grandiose building, Sheriff. It's a building that serves the needs that we all in this room know that we need. How do we get that across to the folks that need to hear the message and that are going to say yes, ultimately, to what we all know that we need. So thanks. I'm looking forward to moving forward. I'm looking forward to our consolidated efforts, our consolidated message, and actually getting right onto the stump, right onto the doorstep, and being able to answer in detail the questions of why do I need a courthouse? Why do I need a library? Why do I need a courthouse? Why do I need Station 2? Why do I need a courthouse? The messaging system, the messaging method is very, very similar. You know, once again, when we built Station 2, it failed a couple of times before we built Station 2. But ultimately, we built it because we were able to let people know what would happen if we didn't build Station 2. And I'm excited, Judge Vogt, Sheriff, DA Pearl, I'm very, very excited about moving forward hand in hand to paint the message and deliver the salient words to the folks who are going to ultimately join us in understanding the need for this. So thank you very much for being here this morning. And thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I'm very impressed with the work you're doing. I'd like to know a little bit more about the project team. Mr. Mokryski mentioned the project team. How often are you meeting? Who's a member of it? That sort of thing.
I'm going to ask Mr. Rickoff to come up and just talk about, because we have several different project teams. We have a communications team, a finance team, a project-based team, and they're all meeting sort of regularly, so he can walk through that.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, that is very accurate. There are multiple teams with very specific purposes. Is there a particular one that you'd want to?
Well, I was kind of getting at, what I'm getting at with this is how much of this is internal to the functioning of the court system, such as the judges, the sheriff, the district attorney, internal to the court system, and how much of it is external to the court system?
At this point, we definitely are leaning towards the internal structures of the system, but it is collaborative every step of the way. We're not having meetings where the courts, the DA, the sheriff's office, and other partners aren't invited to participate in it. The engagement team is probably the best example of a fuller, more built-out team that does include multiple voices, opinions, community leaders wanting to weigh in.
How about the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce?
The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce has been involved throughout this. I would say I'm going to get the Lane County Bar Association
County Bar Association.
So there are multiple players.
How about the Public Defender Service?
Yes, they've been involved.
Okay, good. I think that's good to hear, the involvement of some of the other groups that are, involved, but not to the extent that the folks here at the table have been involved. So that's helpful to learn. Another question I have about the polling is that there's proposed polling that Ms. Ashbridge talked about, but I'm interested in the polling that was done right after the election and what was learned about the difference between the May group of voters that were apparently polled after the election and now a different group of voters that apparently will be asked or may be asked, at least in the fall, a different group of voters, a much larger group of voters. And I'm just curious what you were able to learn about why people voted no and the type of people that voted no.
So we fairly thoroughly went over those results on the September 24th meeting, and I would be more than happy to pull out all of those materials and make sure that you have a copy of that, Commissioner. Ultimately, we learned that, as we saw again in the informal survey, there's continuing confusion over what agency is involved, specifically between the Lane County and State of Eugene governments. A lot of confusion with other projects in the community, including City Hall. I am shocked to hear the number of people that think we've torn down our courthouse already, and as well as confusion with the federal courthouse. So people who are associating it with a fairly recent rebuild. And so that came through loud and clear, and as well as a sense that voters wanted to see more of, they wanted us to show our work a little bit more and how we had gotten to that proposal, and wanted to see us be responsive to their desire to see a more efficient proposal in terms of cost and then return on that investment for voters. And I think those are all things that we've been successful in starting to define, and are, again, excited to hear what our community thinks as we begin this phase 2 of public outreach.
Is the specific data from that polling, the post-election polling, on the website for the project or on the website for the Board of Commissioners agenda for that week in September? Where is that available to the public?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, it is within the Board of Commissioners materials.
Okay, for the September
24th, 2019.
Okay, good. And then are you using the same firm in your future polling that you used before?
No.
So the polling that was released as of September 21, that polling will be done by a different company than is going to be chosen for the future?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any more comments? Commissioner Berning?
On this one, I really had to defer to Commissioner Bozovich. He's the reason why I got as engaged as I did last time. I have some questions and I have some comments. My first comment is, Commissioner Sorensen, I meet monthly with members of the Eugene Chamber who are in your district, not mine, and they are intending to support this next initiative very vigorously.
Yeah. And I met with them about 2 weeks ago, and they said the same thing.
Oh, so okay, I forgot. I answer questions I don't know the answers to. I apologize. Okay, first question I don't know the answer to. Devin, in the online polling survey that you discussed, what was the quantity and quality of the input you received? How many people? And can you provide any qualitative remarks?
So the online survey that we conducted a couple of months ago was open November through December and into part of January. It was unscientific, so it wasn't the type of poll where we go out and specifically solicit responses from a group of people that mirror the makeup of our community. It was an opt-in poll that we advertised through community events and online, things like that. We had nearly 250 respondents, which is pretty good compared to a lot of the other online surveys that we do. But we don't, again, know how representative that is of the voting population of our community. What it did and the value that we received from it is people that took the time to take it are clearly engaged in the topic. It helped us better understand their vision for what justice in our community should look like. That's partly where we pulled this word cloud. And so one of the questions in that survey was, what does justice look like to you? What do you want to see for that in your community? And so you can see the words that are larger were repeated more often by respondents. It also helped us gauge, again, that level of understanding of the current challenges and gave us some of that qualitative, if not quantitative, feedback as we evaluated the different proposals and options as part of the project team.
Thank you. You also answered my second question, which is, what is a scientific survey as opposed to this? Mr. Mokrahajski, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but even when we went out last year, the bond would not have been sold by the state until February 2021-ish. So as you talk about construction costs increasing, we're still looking, are we not, at the same projection of construction costs for this new proposal as we were for the last? I mean, they're not going to increase 6.5% from what was being projected, or am I wrong?
Well, we're still evaluating that. Do you want to?
I would say there are a number of things that we have not started yet because we do not have the funding in hand, including design elements, things that we would, had this passed, we would be well underway with a lot of the engineering and design work that we simply cannot begin.
Thank you. And right now, if we're successful on a minimum decreasing the cost of the last ask by $20 million, is that roughly about 15% decrease? Because I think it's going to be important as we pitch this to let people know.
I would say about 10%, right around 10%
No.
we're estimating.
No, because
of the total cost.
No, right, but the ask was for
right
local residents, and I think we really need to focus on that. Not
yes, that's correct. Yes, so 10% of total cost, probably more like 15% of the local ask,
which is significant.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me just add one thing to that, because this was an important sort of distinction that we understood, that it really is important for us to clarify for voters locally of what there's a total project cost number that kept being repeated, but the impact to local voters to local taxpayers much different and less than the total cost. So there's a gap in understanding about total cost versus what we would be paying as local taxpayers.
And actually, that's why I tried to clarify it. So the amount of money from the state would not be issued in bond form. Correct. It's the same time, but there's a lot of work that we couldn't do. The amount of money from the state is not going to decrease by anything, but the amount of money that's requested from local taxpayers will decrease by at least 15%. I think that the messaging, some more comments here. It's been 9 months approximately since May when this was on the ballot until now. And now it's about 9 months from this moment right now until when it's being looked at to be on the ballot. So within that context, I think timing is becoming critical. As I hear this, this is our last shot. We don't get a third shot. This is the shot. My understanding was the previous proposal was fairly bare bones for what it was, as opposed to Multnomah County that chose its marble and had commissioners go to a place in Italy where that marble was being manufactured. That is not the Lane County approach. I also believe, as I was presented this, I believe that if we as commissioners vote to refer this to ballot again, every individual commissioner has to make some commitments to help campaign for this. I mean, I have thoughts about, we all have town halls in our communities. We all advertise them heavily. We all draw upon the resources here to assist us make the case. District Attorney Perlow Friday night learned that this commissioner doesn't make a good case unless he's fairly prepared. I'm just being silly. And I just see this as absolutely critical. So this is our shot. I can't believe you've figured out how to swallow $20 million or 15% of what was a bare bones budget. This is not, I agree with you, this is not for the good of anyone in this room. This is for the good of the community. And as I stated many times, this is going to bring $90 million more into this community that we are going to intentionally recycle through the community in terms of jobs and contracts and workers and economic activity as much as possible. So I'm all in again, and I hope we all are. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozovich.
I'm sorry, Chair, if I could just make one clarification there. Thank you, Commissioner Burney, and just on the estimated over $20 million in cost reductions, the majority of that will be a dollar for dollar reduction on local taxpayers. Things like the underground parking, excavation for the underground parking, the elimination of parole and probation office space, the evidence storage, those are all, I believe, dollar for dollar local costs that we were not going to receive state match for. There is a portion of that, and this is what we're evaluating. There may be a slight reduction in the state amount related to the courtroom pieces. So we definitely looked at that, and we want to maximize any reductions we're making. We want to maximize the local impact, maximize the reduction to local taxpayers while maximizing the amount that we can utilize of the state funding. So that definitely entered into the conversation. We think we hit the sweet spot there with this proposal.
And somehow we have to convey everything you said in a few words.
Right.
Right.
I'm not very good at that. I'll leave that to others.
Commissioner Rusbridge.
Thank you. So you just pre-answered a question I was going to ask, which was when you talk about reductions, I was wondering if it was any portion of the facility that was eligible for the state match and would have a corresponding reduction in the state matching bonding. So you just addressed that, so I'll skip that question. But after we kind of got past our first crisis budget, one of the first people that kind of started, lobbying me for stuff was then presiding Judge Bearden and about the status of facilities of the court. And, we arranged at that time to take KAZI on a tour of the courthouse back in 2012. And then I got involved at the state level with trying to make sure, to secure this whole idea of state matching funding. There's a court facilities task force put together by the Association of Oregon Counties, which I've served on since its inception, and had to fight consistently about making sure we kept our place in the priority line and, that we were eligible and the need we had, and, fighting about a previous court facilities study that was done by the state that really wasn't very accurate when it came to our facility, and having to get them to correct some of those assumptions. So it's been a long invested battle in trying to provide this state match, which will leverage the local money, and trying to reduce the impact on our local taxpayers. And it's been a very transparent set of master planning. This has been identified through our legislative committee as our #1 legislative ask for years, is to prioritize the court funding and our court funding. It's been in our strategic plan for years, all adopted through very public processes involving community stakeholders and all that. So it's not like this has been a surprise to the community. And it's something I think we've been very vested in a very transparent and very open way. And what's interesting is in those little bullet points that came back from the public participation, back in, I think it was 2017 or 18, I sat in on a visioning exercise with the current judges that served on the circuit court at that time, led by our consultant at the time, just to get an idea of what they were thinking of as a facility. And that's almost a dead repeat of what they said. I mean, almost word to word, be reasonable and practical. They understood that Airstream trailer down the road here was not what they were after. They understood that with that as the example of largesse in government, they needed to be reasonable and practical. And so our judges 2 years ago were echoing exactly what the community is saying now. And that's the way the project has been designed. The fact that we were able to squeeze another 20 million out, I'm surprised, because one of the things I kept telling people was we were pretty frugal about how we planned this thing. We really weren't trying to do anything special. So all those things, safety first, the equity and equal access, privacy, spending wisely, and not going to Italy for marble, all those things. And also being honest about total cost of the project. I don't want to have to come back to the legislature for furniture. Same people that bought the Italian marble. So, we have been straightforward, open, and transparent with the voters about this project, I think, from the beginning. And I think what we're hearing back from the voters is exactly the values we've always instilled in this project. So I'm kind of glad to see that matchup. I'm glad to see we've kind of gone through an exercise to try and trim some out, and we're trying to do it on the local contribution side, not necessarily impact our state match. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing here with that. So I really hope we can continue moving forward in a positive direction with this project. I'll preface this with the caution that I'm hearing out there. I still have people think that I was building myself a new office building where I was going to have a new grand office on the top floor in a corner somewhere. I was in Florence this last week several times. Multiple people walked up to me and asked if we were going to try and build a new courthouse all the way over there in Eugene again. Why we weren't going to build something in Florence. And just the non-understanding of, county seat, circuit court, this isn't justice courts, those sort of issues. There is still a lot of education to do out there. Where people don't understand in Florence how this benefits them in Florence. And don't understand why it can't be outside of Eugene, why it can't be outside of downtown. I still hear people concerned about parking for the courthouse if it stays downtown. Why can't it be out somewhere on the edge where there's more parking? Why can't it be by Walmart? Seriously, I've had that question come up.
I have too.
But I kind of explained to them there's this sort of issue with efficiency and jail transport that goes on, and where's our jail? And a few other issues like that, and also central to, bus lines and everything else. There's other issues, but I just want to say we still have a big lift. And if we're targeting November, we've got 9 months to make that lift. And it's going to take all 5 commissioners, like Commissioner Burney said, with a big commitment, and our elected officials standing in there, getting our legal community to march as one instead of having some divisiveness in it, making sure our public defenders are 100% behind us, as Commissioner Sorensen mentioned. We really have to present a clear, united front and do a really good job of education on this because it's going to be tough. And we kind of witnessed trying to do it quick and fast and taking a quick shot early, and we kind of stumbled on that. But I think we've done a really good job of trying to trim cost. I love that the public's comments match what the judges want. We don't want to spend extra money. We don't want this to be, a monument to ourselves. We want it to be efficient. We want to spend wisely. So thank you for your efforts on this.
Well, I have a couple of questions and comments to add, which is in this new proposal, I think DA Perlow, you kind of maybe had more of the bag that in the sense that you are giving up a possible location in the future for future courtrooms. And I know that decision, mutual decision, could not have been harder, knowing the needs in the future. And I know that this is less than ideal for all parties. The prior design had incorporated some really needed elements that don't necessarily all go away with the new proposed elements, as in maybe we can add them later kind of stuff. Some of them, you just can't add them later. And if I picture this right, we're basically eliminating an entire floor of this building, and it's coming down one more level to accommodate some reduction in costs from the feedback that we're hearing from people. And that may, in the future, come at a cost to your department in possible relocation. I applaud your, work in doing that, and I know that, again, couldn't have been an easy decision to make, knowing that that could come down the pike at some point. In addition to that, it's very important to also acknowledge that the new courthouse we're all at safety improvements. It's important that the public is safe within the building. It's also important to know that the people that are bringing us justice are also safe in their own work building, which right now we know is not the case. And that's a pretty significant call to action because everybody should feel safe in their workplace, as well as the public. I just want to acknowledge that portion of it as well. We've talked about it before as well. And I'm glad that Commissioner Farr brought up some of the messaging issues because as the other rural commissioner here, we didn't poll well, we didn't have the highest numbers when it came to voting for this courthouse in May. And connecting to those voters is going to be extremely important for a November election. I appreciate that acknowledgement, and I am firmly in support of moving this forward. I'm particularly interested in doing some public town halls this year, and right now, potentially jointly with Commissioner Burney, but I am open to doing other town halls with other commissioners and probably independently because it's not an open meeting, but or with any of the team members to get out there and discuss this as much as possible because it is so important. But that messaging to rural voters for both the West Lane and East Lane districts is going to be really critical to pushing this, into the zone where the majority of the people are really interested in seeing this come to fruition. Any other comments before we end? Commissioner Farr?
Ever so briefly, I didn't quite finish the way we got the library to pass and the way we passed the Station 7. Station 2, not 7. But we also, the Ferry Street Bridge, remember that failed a couple of times before we passed it? There was a technology bond in Bethel that failed before we passed it. And really, each of those, there are 3 strategies involved. One, you get everybody who said yes the first time to say yes again. You change some people's minds who said no the first time. And then the third is you get people to vote who didn't vote before. So three, all the tactics that we're talking about kind of wrap into the 3 different strategies of the different people that you're addressing. So it's easy. And so let's do that.
Commissioner Bozovich and then Bernie.
Thank you. So as we look forward to being successful, and my district voted this down pretty significantly. One of the things I can tell you is one of the things I hear quite often, and we just had our public safety plan here, is the lack of rural patrol. And why aren't we doing something about that first? Why is the courthouse more important than me being able to get a sheriff here when somebody's breaking into my house? That's an issue for us, and I think we're going to have to address that elephant in the room in some way, which along with that, we need to be talking about how we're going to address other income coming into this county. If we're not talking about federal forests contributing to the operational costs of this county, this is not going to pass in my district again. So just, for the board and for everybody else here to consider, those 2 issues are going to loom large.
Commissioner Burney.
First, it was an honor making this request of our citizens with you all. And I honestly look forward to that process again, and hopefully we'll be more effective. Is there do we know if there's a Friends of the Justice Center yet formed? 501c3 attendant to this? Okay. Has there been any progress on identifying key liaisons that live in the precincts and the areas where the no vote occurred last time at this point in time?
We have been focused on identifying primarily community groups because they're often a bit easier to reach in some of the areas, and inviting them either to take part in the outreach that we've done so far or to take part in upcoming outreach. One of the things that we forgot to mention is that in addition to the 5 focus group style events that we'll hold here, we'll also be sending a team out. We're confirmed for a group in Veneta, Cottage Grove, and I think we're hoping to identify a group in Florence, but that hasn't been accomplished yet. So we are looking for ways to make sure that our rural communities do have greater opportunity to participate throughout the process.
I just wanted, when I'm sitting here listening to what you're all talking about, especially Commissioner Farr, when you were talking, and we think about those rural communities that are all part of Lane County. We're all together in this. They're all part of Lane County. One of the things that I don't think that we really did last time around, and part of it I think was because we had this short runway that we were talking about. And when Commissioner Farr talks about how do we let these folks know that how it affects them and how it affects their community. And so I think that one of the things that we actually can do is that we can talk about real cases from their community. When you were talking and you said Walton, last week I had a very significant criminal case in my courtroom that involved the citizens of Walton who saved someone's life. And that victim was gushing about the citizens of Walton saving her life. And she was stabbed multiple times. She would not have lived had it not been for that community. And that case went through our system and came all the way through our system. And I did a settlement conference to see if we could get that to a resolution for that victim and for the state and the defense. And we accomplished that. You know, the place that we did it wasn't ideal. She didn't necessarily feel safe, I don't think, in the environment she was in, but that's a story that can be told to the citizens of Walton. We have a case going on right now, or went on this morning, a significant case from Cottage Grove. We also, yesterday, I sentenced a very significant case from south of Cottage Grove with the death of someone on our roadways, and their family was in my courtroom, and it was very significant. So what I think we might have missed the last time around, number one, we had too short of a runway to reach all those people. But number two, when we were reaching those people, we didn't have those real life stories from their community that those were happening in our building. It didn't bring that to them. And we have those from every single area of Lane County. And they're happening every day. I cannot tell you the amount of tears that have gone on in my courtroom in the last few days. Okay? So I think that might be something that we can work on a little bit so that they understand more of how it's affecting their particular community.
I think that would be huge.
Commissioner Bozevich.
I just want to maybe make the board aware, maybe the presiding judge can explain this. Can you talk a little bit about your limitations in elections as a sitting judge, so that the board's understanding of that?
So the judges are held to a code of conduct that is separate and distinct from attorneys. We cannot directly seek funds. We cannot directly comment on broader issues that could be of a topic that would appear in front of us. Because then litigants might not feel that we were neutral in some way because we were considering one thing over another thing. So there are a lot of things that we can't answer. We can't take positions on certain things. We can support this effort because it has a direct correlation to our work in the building, but we cannot do it by directly seeking funds. Which should be obvious as to why judges can't ask people for money, which my kids
Can't
sometimes.
say, we have a favor, though.
Yeah, see, my kids don't understand this sometimes. Mom, can you help me sell the Girl Scout cookie, no. So we do have those limitations, but all of the judges have told me that within our ethics rules, everyone is going to be supporting this effort and going out and doing the support that we can do. There's just some things we can't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, thank you, everyone. It was a great update. I think we have some direction to go here towards November. And I appreciate all your hard work thus far. And hopefully we'll make it through the finish line this year. All right. We will recess the Board of Commissioners until 1:30 back here in Harris Hall.